Okay, welcome everyone. Good afternoon. It is Thursday, July 29th, and we are starting our meeting of the Elected Officials Transportation Committee, which is a meeting of 3 jurisdictions: City of Aspen, Town of Snowmass Village, and Pitkin County. Pitkin County is delighted to host, and I'm delighted to see all of our elected reps here, mostly in the room, and some joining us on Zoom. And we do have a full agenda today, and the start of our agenda is for public comment. And so I will go ahead and turn to our tech folks. Can you please pull up if there are participants who have called in? Under attendees? Okay. I'm seeing folks join us here, and I see some hand raises. If you wish to participate in public comment, please press *9 or use the raise hand function. And I'll call on you, and you'll have 3 minutes to speak. Please introduce yourselves to our boards. Andrea Bryan, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Thank you. Perfect. Okay. Hopefully everyone can hear and see me.
We can hear you.
Yeah, we can hear you. Go right ahead.
Okay, great. I may know a few of you, but my name is Andrea Bryan. I am an attorney representing a grassroots organization called the West End Pedestrian Safety Group, which is a nonprofit group formed for the purpose of addressing the traffic crisis that has arisen in the historic residential neighborhood in the West End in Aspen as a result of commuters using the neighborhood streets as an alternative way out of Aspen. Just by way of background, I have worked in government myself for almost all of my career. I'm now in the private sector. I was the chief DA in Aspen and assistant city attorney for the city of Aspen for a while. And now I'm in private practice in Carbondale, where I live with my family. But as I said, I represent this grassroots organization that is attempting to work and hopes to work with all government officials, particularly those in Aspen and those and you all here today, to help solve this increasingly pressing issue. For those that may be interested, I would encourage you to go to the group's website, westendpedestriansafetygroup.org. The membership for the organization is growing by the day and is now up to more than 30 concerned citizens. The group took it upon itself and at its own expense to hire a traffic engineer whose preliminary data was shared with the city of Aspen and showed that there are about 2,216 vehicles, nearly 70% of that of which is westbound traffic on West Smuggler on a daily basis, Monday through Friday from about 3 to 6 p.m. These numbers are just too high for a residential neighborhood, and the problem, as I've said, just seems to be getting worse by the day, with reports now that people are cutting in and out of alleyways to try to exit Aspen. It's rendering this neighborhood virtually unusable by the people who live there between 3 and 6 p.m. and simply isn't sustainable and, most importantly, safe, and needs to be addressed as soon as possible. We don't want there to have to be car crashes or injuries before this issue is confronted head on. It is a solvable problem, and we have presented some options, including making West Smuggler one way or closing it off to only one block local traffic, which is done on West Hopkins and Hallam. Now, of course, this is, as I've said, considered for those who live in the West End to be a crisis, and for those who live on West Smuggler near Power Plant Road in particular, those residents are subject to being unable to get to and from their homes during 3 to 6 p.m. on the weekdays, breathing in the exhaust from the fossil fuel burning vehicles.
Andrea, I will need to ask you to conclude your comments shortly, please.
Okay, I'm wrapping up right now. I just want to bring this to EOTC's attention because, of course, this is an EOTC and public transit issue as well, because it involves the broader issue of transportation and traffic in the valley, and particularly in and out of Aspen. It's a crisis and probably the most pressing issue that you all as elected officials must address. It affects the safety and quality of life for all of us that live, work, and play in the valley.
Thank you,
and we
Andrea.
want action to be taken now. Thank
Great.
you.
Thanks so much. Nice to hear from you. Next, I see Dee Dee Moore. If you'd like to please go ahead and unmute, and you have 3 minutes.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for letting me comment. My name is Diane Moore, and I'm a full-time resident of Aspen, and I have lived in West End for, 31 years. As a background note, I used to be the City of Aspen's planning director in the 1990s, which seems kind of ancient right now. But we still have the issues of the entrance to Aspen. That hasn't changed. As a matter of fact, that was one of my first projects handed to me when I moved here in 91. My comments focus on the entrance to Aspen transportation issues and as mentioned before in the previous speaker, the escalating number of vehicles entering the West End with the volume of trucks and cars cutting through the West End. It's really gotten worse over the past years, and I'd say particularly the past 5 or 6 years. And it's really become a safety and quality of life issues for those of us that live here. It's not sustainable, and it's really dangerous. And we don't believe residential streets should be used as arterial roadways, especially during the late afternoon hours. We need help. Any immediate actions that the city can do to implement measures to discourage traffic from cutting through will be fantastic. I would also say that those changes should be viewed in the context of the entire West End neighborhood, as changes to one street will just divert the traffic impacts to another. But all of this really leads to the big picture, which involves everyone sitting around that table, which is the entrance to Aspen and the unacceptable impacts to residents really throughout the county and to some degree the Roaring Fork Valley. With the pace of development in our area and so many more people moving to the area, I would really implore the committee to focus on tackling the big transportation issues. The long-term solutions which were identified in that record of decision for the entrance to Aspen, especially the preferred alternatives, really need to be brought forward. I know focusing on the entrance to Aspen won't be easy. I've been there. I was involved with it. It's the elephant in the room. And I know that this group has worked for decades, and you've implemented some of these solutions, transportation solutions, which we all appreciate. But as citizens, we desperately need your leadership on this. Really, what's happening now isn't sustainable. And thank you so much for your time.
Great, thank you so much. If there are others who wish to make comment to the board, please press *9 to raise your hand. Alternatively, you can unmute yourself with *6. Okay, I'll check back in with folks who have called in. Are there individuals in the room who wish to make public comment? No? All right, I will give it another few seconds. If folks are watching from home, there is a delay from the room to the GrassRoots feed on your television. Okay, I'm going to go ahead then and close the public comment and return to our agenda. The next item is committee member updates. So I will start with folks in the room, and then we'll go to folks on Zoom, and I'll ask our committee members, please use the raise hand function if you know how. Any comments from our electeds here in the room? All right.
Yeah.
Francie.
I'll
Yes.
say to the people who called in that I think we all agree with you and have a lot of sympathy for the people in the West End as well as everywhere else who are impacted by the congestion which seems worse this summer than ever before to me. It is such a rat's nest of possible solutions, but I just want you to know we hear you guys and also want to find some solutions.
Thanks, Francie. All right, I see Steve Child. Hi, Steve.
Hi. I would agree with Francie's comments and the comments of the two members of the
Why do you
public
have to talk about it?
who called. I think that the EOTC and all of our three bodies should take a look at the record of decision very seriously and analyze it and see if we think it needs to be modified in any fashion, what needs implementing to solve the entrance to Aspen problem. I personally feel like we need 4 lanes somehow going into Aspen and in and out of Aspen, and we very likely need a second bridge. So in case something happens to one of the Castle Creek Bridge, that there's an alternative for getting traffic in and out of Aspen. And we could possibly do it just by implementing the remaining parts of the record of decision as it's written right now. It might require reopening that and changing aspects of it. But I agree with the two callers and their comments. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Steve. Okay, folks. Rachel, go ahead.
Thank you. Make sure I'm on board here with the microphones. Take out my chewing gum, sorry. I had run into one of the individuals who called in today at the grocery store and was asking me about smuggler. And we've heard public comments during our past couple of regular meetings from the neighbors. And I said that, hey, there's this EOTC meeting. We only meet 4 times a year. And this is the group spending your tax dollars on improving transportation. So, maybe you should take that concern up a level beyond just city council, because at the end of the day, the entrance and how we fund it or whether we deal with it or not, I think really falls within the EOTC in many ways. And, the other side of the bridge is Snowmass and Pitkin County residents, and we have Aspen residents who also feel the issue. But to see that whole neighborhood become the detour for Highway 82 on a daily basis, riding by the child care center, it's just unacceptable. And I guess I'm making my comment now as opposed to when we vote on the measures we're going to spend money on next year. I believe they are all needed measures, but I think they're all incremental and small until we deal with the elephant in the room and deal with the entrance and refamiliarize ourselves with the record of decision and what the possibilities are and all the alternatives that were screened out for various reasons. A new record of decision, a new impact statement, environmental impact statement, would probably end up with about the same solution if the conditions that the town puts in place during scoping are the same. And those conditions have been maintaining traffic at the 1993 levels, which is why it led to a bus rapid transit system and just one general traffic lane in each direction, no unrestricted 4-lane. But until, if we were to try to do a new EIS, it would cost millions of dollars. And I don't know that CDOT would want to give us a new EIS when we haven't done too much with the last one. But I just think it's not going to weigh, and it bothers all of our residents on a daily basis, whether they're trying to get into town or trying to get out of town. Our buses are in mixed traffic. I've been hearing people say, well, let's send more buses to the intercept a lot more frequently. And I'm like, yeah, until they get stuck in mixed traffic, it takes you twice as many buses and drivers to do the same amount, because there's no free flowing and there's no dedicated bus lane for the bus rapid transit when it gets there. So I realize it's a complicated issue, but I do think for my time at the table, EOTC should be looking at this again and bringing it back forward. And it's not something we can ignore. Thank you.
Patty.
Yeah, and it's not that I disagree with what Rachel's saying and what we need to do about the traffic on Highway 82 coming and going. Traffic this year is blown out of proportion than anything we've seen in the 41 years I've been in this community. But I think the issue with the West End is what's going on right now. And I don't know if there's a right now solution, because to do the entrance to Aspen,
I agree with that, Pat.
to open the record of decision and to do EIS is years down the road. And I don't know what we can do for the West End. We really are going to have to put some thought into this, because what if we close the West End down, it's going to put the traffic back on 82. It's now backed up to original curve. It'll be backed up Independence Pass before we know it, of people trying to get out of town on 82.
But maybe
So-
that's a momentum we finally need to
Well-
deal with it as a town.
Well, but that being said, we're just gonna, there's unintended consequences of where we're gonna push that traffic. So, I don't have answers, I wish I did. I'm just trying to bring to light, the fact is, if we had a short-term fix, we could do it, but are we creating another greater problem? Sometimes spreading out the numbers just creates a quagmire everywhere else in this community. So it's gonna take the EOTC, but it's gonna take some impetus with CDOT and with the state as to what we might be able to do in the short term to resolve the issues in the West End, because it's bad over there, and I feel for those people. It's just, then we're going to hear from the next group on the other side of the highway or at the east end of town. So I just want to make sure we always keep that in mind as we're trying to fix a solution, find a solution for this.
And I will jump in. I think what would be helpful for me, and I'm going to sort of look to David for maybe future reporting out or by email, so we don't wait 4 months. But you know, it would be helpful for me to know what is the bus ridership right now, like what is the WeCycle uptake right now? You know, how much is coming out of COVID, folks are uncomfortable with still riding and using public transportation? How much of is it just out of practice maybe on some of these things? Or, you know, thinking about it in those terms of like, is this the context of 2021 as an isolated year? Or is this the context of like 2021 moving forward for us to think about how we might solve this, you know, whether it is a short-term fix or it needs to be a longer-term lens. Oh, Rachel, go quick and then
Yeah,
Skippy.
thank you so much. I really agree with that, and I think what also would be very informative for all of us is looking at the record of decisions, population growth numbers for the valley, and what they anticipated we would need to do with RAFTA and the number of buses if we were going to maintain a certain mode shift. And, you know, I just remember, because I'm so old, people saying, oh, the valley will never have 60,000 people in it. Oh, those numbers will never grow that much. And so I think part of our solution has to be in the context of what growth has occurred and what growth we can anticipate going forward. But it'd be nice to know what those, how accurate those projections were or weren't. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Skippy.
You know, I appreciate what you're saying, Kelly. Rachel brought this up the other day at council and a few times, and I asked the same question about RAFTA ridership and the current moment versus the future moment, which is important because, like you said, this is a generational infrastructure project if it were to be done. And so I did go back and I looked, because I don't remember if I remembered all the YouTube video I watched from 4 years ago with
Oh, my word.
38 votes and the whole thing. And I appreciate that it's the right problem. Right? Like the situation in the West End right now is atrocious. The traffic is atrocious. I work between Snowmass and Aspen. I ride my bike around town. And going back and looking at it, I think the record of decision, the solution for the problem back in the 90s, is the wrong solution to the right problem now. Part of that is recognizing the current moment, right? So the rough number that got thrown out at our council meeting is RAFTA ridership or capacity down 40%, right? So we hope that some of those people will get back on those buses. We're also seeing the biggest residential construction boom we've ever seen. And if you talk to people, a huge amount of that traffic is workers. There are things we can do to reduce that. We once said we're going to house 60% of our workforce. We're probably 30% right now. Those people are driving in. That's something that we can solve separate from a giant infrastructure project. So we can make big improvements on those. Then we've got to think about, well, what is this project, who is this project actually delivering for, right? More than half of teenagers don't have their driver's license, 65%. More than half will never get them. The Teslas that are going into people's garages right now are designed as stores of energy, and they are being designed and sending information back to eventually be on-demand transportation when they're not used. So the transportation reality that we are designing for is going to be fundamentally different than it is now, right? And so that's why we've got a group that's looked at this for years and has said that a big infrastructure project is not the answer. And while these may be small things, the things we're already working on, done in concert, will have a measurable difference. And so continuing to work on those is important. And I would just say, if we are seriously going to consider in the future a big infrastructure project, I don't think the answer is bringing more cars into town. It's having the cars out of town.
I agree.
Right? We should have a walkable core. We should have the opportunity to use our streets for the local business we say we want, for the park space we say we want, for the gathering and community space that we say we want. If we're going to invest a generation in a project, like, let's do it for the future generation. So, my perspective.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Other director comments? Checking in online. Any other comments, folks, before we move on?
Kelly, I do have to ask a question. It's my understanding that the transportation studies that were embarked on, and I was on the BOCC at the time, not the city council, but the city council at the time said that they didn't want the entrance to be any part of the discussion, and that they were looking at solutions other than that. And so I think that it's worth noting that it's not that the reports didn't suggest going forward, they were deliberately not looking at it. Thank you.
If that's true, then I would love to know that. My understanding is those things were looked at, but I could be wrong about
yeah,
that. So, and we've got people in the room that can say so.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, thank you. Okay, so we're going to move on to our first item for discussion. And David, I do want to do sort of a check-in with you, since we are now operating under a new IGA, where our quorum rules are, I think, clearer, but our voting rules are also wrapped up in the IGA. So do we need to take a roll call vote at all? We can sort of note for the record who's here.
After my discussions with each of the jurisdictions, trying to make sure that we're not doing anything that's contrary to any jurisdiction's current operations, the way we should move forward is, I don't think that we need to do a roll call at the beginning of the meeting, but we do need to do roll call votes for each of the action items. So that way we can get a record of who's voting, whether they're virtual or in person.
Okay, and then my other question is, do we then open a public hearing on those items, since we're taking positions?
They will be, these are public hearing items,
Okay.
so yes.
Okay, great. Good to know. Thank you very much. All right, so let's move on. We're going to report out on the following studies and get administrative direction to staff on the 2021 near-term transit improvement program. And I will turn it over to you, Dave.
All right.
Why don't you introduce yourself, since I didn't do so properly? My apologies.
No problem. I am David Pesnichak. I'm the Regional Transportation Administrator for the Elected Officials Transportation Committee. Before I get into the action items, I do want to review, as we do at the beginning of every EOTC meeting, our vision statement, mission statement, and the bounds that we have to work within in terms of state statute and voter requirements. So we do have an EOTC vision statement that states that we envision the Roaring Fork Valley as the embodiment of a sustainable transportation system emphasizing mass transit and mobility that contributes to the happiness and well-being of residents and visitors. We also have a mission statement that states that we will work collectively to reduce and manage the volume of vehicles on the road and parking system, and continue to develop and support a comprehensive multimodal long-range strategy that will ensure a convenient, equitable, and efficient transportation system for the Roaring Fork Valley. And then any funds expended or staff time is bound by certain state statutes and voter requirements from our funding source, and that requires that all funds be utilized for financing, constructing, operating, and managing mass transportation within the Roaring Fork Valley. And then we hit on a couple of these already, public comment and committee member updates. In terms of action items, we do have 2 action items on the agenda this afternoon. The first one, as Kelly noted, is the 2021 EOTC Near-Term Transit Improvement Program, and the second one is the Maroon Creek Roundabout Reconstruction's 2022 CDOT funding request. Do have a lot of information to go through here this afternoon, so I ask that I go through the presentation. Please keep track of your questions and comments, and then we'll take those at the end, along with public comment on each of each of the action items. And I say that just to try to keep things moving along here. So looking at the 2021 EOTC Near-Term Transit Improvement Program, there's a lot that goes into this. So as a little overview of the presentation that I'd like to provide, I'd like to start off with an introduction to the staff recommendation itself. And this is to give you an idea of where we're looking at going, and then taking a step back at how the integrated mobility system study and the Upper Valley Transit Enhancement studies work together to inform this staff recommendation, followed by an overview of the integrated mobility system study and the Upper Valley Transit Enhancement study, and then spend the bulk of the time on the staff recommendation itself, which is entitled the 2021 EOTC Near-Term Transit Improvement Program. So starting off then with an introduction to the staff recommendation. This recommendation comes to you as an outcome from two studies that the EOTC commissioned. Both of these studies completed last month in June. The first one is the Integrated Mobility System, or IMS, study that was conducted by Farron Peers. The second one is the Upper Valley Transit Enhancement Study, or UVTE, study that was conducted by Mead and Hunn. This staff recommendation is intended to provide direction in the near term to staff for development of the annual EOTC work plan, direction to staff on development of the annual EOTC budget, and direction to staff on procurement of grants and other assistance. The recommendation is anticipated to move forward as administrative direction. So if you recall from the new EOTC IGA, administrative direction requires consent of the 3 jurisdictions, but is not memorialized in a final resolution of approval. And then in terms of long-term efforts, I think this goes back to the discussion that was being had earlier, which was a very good discussion. We are at this point trying to identify what is that lower hanging fruit that we can start working on now while we have those longer term conversations, including the entrance to Aspen and a couple of other ideas that came out of the integrated mobility system. So the thinking here and what you see in front of you does not include things like the entrance to Aspen, and that is intentional because that is not viewed as a near-term item as a part of this program. In addition, this was anticipated to culminate 2 studies, and that the entrance to Aspen was not a part of either of those studies. So I just urge you to keep that in mind as we move through this. So then looking at the near-term transit improvement program itself, again, it was informed by the integrated mobility system and Upper Valley Transit Enhancement studies. These 2 studies came from the integrated mobility system itself that was outlined in the Upper Valley Mobility Report, which was developed by a 31-member citizen community task force on transportation mobility in 2016 and 2017. So that IMS that was identified within this report has 5 tenets or strategies. Those strategies include BRT enhancement, ride sharing, congestion reduction measures, HOV lane enforcement, and ride hailing. So the first study, the Integrated Mobility System study, analyzed vehicle miles, VMT, vehicle miles traveled, and greenhouse gas emissions effectiveness in terms of reducing each of those from each of the IMS strategies. Meanwhile, the Upper Valley Transit Enhancement Study, or UVTE, studied specifically the BRT enhancements pillar within the IMS. So you can think of this as being the IMS as being the umbrella study, and the Upper Valley Transit Enhancement study looking at one component within the 5 pillars of the IMS. And this was done intentionally by staff as we were looking at progressing with the IMS and the study that Farron Peers conducted. Notably that ride hailing, ride sharing, HOV lane enforcement, and to a certain degree congestion reduction measures are all fairly contained ideas, and we felt as though we would be able to get enough information from the IMS study itself within that study. The BRT enhancements, however, was really infrastructure focused, and being infrastructure, as you're all aware, it's expensive and it's difficult to reverse. So we want to make sure that anything that comes before you in terms of BRT enhancements is really geared toward making the difference. What are those things that we can do that will really start to move the needle? Because I think there's been a ton of ideas that have been thrown out there over time, and we really wanted to take a step back and look at what would or could reduce VMT and greenhouse gas emissions in terms of those infrastructure improvements. So then moving on to the Integrated Mobility System study itself, and I'm going to provide you some very high-level outlines of each of these studies. There's a lot more detail in the staff packet, and obviously the studies themselves are packed with information. But this slide here identifies the 5 tenants that are identified within the integrated mobility system and their anticipated greenhouse gas emissions reduction if they were implemented in a silo. So you do just say congestion reduction measures, this is the anticipated greenhouse gas emissions. You do just ride sharing, this is your anticipated reduction. And this was important in terms of identifying generally what is the hierarchy amongst them. So as you can see, congestion reduction measures came out first, which wasn't a big surprise. Second ranking was ride sharing, third was BRT enhancements, and then HOV lane enforcement and ride hailing showed, as standalone measures, showed no VMT or greenhouse gas emissions benefit. However, I would argue that even more important than that takeaway are these 2 main takeaways. First, that there's an interdependency of these strategies that is not captured on the previous slide. So there's a multiplier effect with each of these if you do them as a system. And so that multiplication factor is something that we took into account when putting this staff recommendation together for you in terms of the near-term transit improvement program. And then the second item is that there's no silver bullet. And I think over time, particularly in the transportation field, we've constantly said, what is that silver bullet? What's that one thing we can do that's going to solve all of our problems? And something that we've found over time is that there is rarely a silver bullet. And it really is a system that needs to be implemented in order to move these needles. So then finally, and there's a lot more obviously in the IMS study besides these, but I thought this slide was important within the IMS. This was done as a part of the phase 2 study, and this was conducted by Fair and Peers looking at if we put these together in certain packages, what kind of greenhouse gas emissions reduction can we expect? And the first caveat I'd put on this is that while they are shown as packages, they're not necessarily distinct. They're distinct for the purpose of analysis, but in terms of implementation, you can move these back and forth between each of these categories to really make a more robust program. So just moving from left to right, you can see the 5th ranked one here is ride hailing, as is expected as a standalone. If you just do ride hailing, you wouldn't expect to see any VMT or greenhouse gas emissions reductions. If you move up to package 4, where you start doing ride sharing and HOV lane enforcement, then you start making a dent in it. And then moving into 3, you can see we start to make an even bigger dent based on the pyramids at the bottom here. And this is really implementing strategic parking pricing along with BRT enhancements and HOV lane enforcement. And looking at packages 3, 2, and 1, the main change here is, the main difference between these packages is the measure in the congestion reduction. So 3 is just doing parking pricing, 2 is looking at managed lanes, and then 1 is at a cordon toll. So as a reminder for packages 2 and 1, the differences between a managed lane and a cordon toll. A managed lane is what you see on, say, I-70 or Highway 36 between Boulder and Denver. So these are one lane that is managed for high occupancy vehicles and transit. And then if a single occupant vehicle wants to ride in it, there's a toll that adjusts based on the congestion level in order to keep that lane in free flow conditions. A cordon toll is different. It's a little bit more draconian in that everyone going in past a certain point pays a toll. It's pretty much, it's that simple. It's a cordon, exactly. So with these, the main takeaways, I think that it's easy to go to, oh, well, we should do cordon toll. That's the gold standard. But I think looking at this, some of the important items is that HOV lane enforcement is an important ingredient in 3 of these packages. So if you recall from the previous slide, HOV lane enforcement on its own didn't show any greenhouse gas emissions reduction. But if you want to do things like ride sharing, you need an effective HOV lane in order to incentivize that program. Similarly, if you want to do parking pricing, those parking pricing can be then tied together with an HOV lane to work together as a system there as well. And then similarly with BRT enhancements. So regardless of the direction this group or individual jurisdictions decide to go in, BRT enhancements are, again, an essential ingredient there. You have to have that robust transit system in order to support the overall transportation flow. And then moving on to the Upper Valley Transit Enhancement Study, and again, this one looks at the phase BRT enhancements pillar within the IMS. This one was more a traditional study in that it had a study corridor, and we were looking at those infrastructure development or improvements. So the study corridor in this case, we chose the most complicated corridor in the Upper Valley, which was Service Center Road, which is functionally the airport, up to the Maroon Creek Roundabout. And the focus here was on those near-term infrastructure improvements that could satisfy one of two goals. The first goal was increasing transit efficiency and speed, and the second goal was increasing bicycle and pedestrian access to those transit stops. And then the study itself utilized a model. So the results here are all modeled based on traffic flows and walking and bike shed models. I think it's important to note that these models did take into account anticipated new developments coming online, most notably in the AABC. So the most recent data was incorporated into those models. In addition, the model itself took not just an intersection approach, so it looked at the whole corridor, and not just the corridor between the airport and Maroon Creek Roundabout, although that was the focal point for the projects themselves. On the modeling side, we looked, or Mead and Hunt looked, from the Brush Creek Park and Ride all the way into Aspen. So if we do X infrastructure improvement at this intersection or at this location, what will be the overall corridor-wide impact, not just the impact at that specific location? So as a result, we ended up with 10 improvements that were ultimately identified and modeled by Mead and Hunt. And these were modeled, again, both on the intersection and that corridor level. An important point I want to note about the modeling process is that it did assume that we had an effectively enforced HOV lane, which I think we can all agree that the HOV lane currently is not enforced on a routine basis.
Ever.
So
I saw some enforcement the other day coming in.
Was it you? Like, listen,
Was
guys.
not I.
But I think that's important to point out that when you're looking at the study and thinking about these results, is that it's assuming that we do have an effectively enforced HOV lane. And then finally, with the contract that we had with Mead and Hunt, who did this study, we did set it up in such a way that we would do the modeling and bring the modeling to you, or the results of that modeling to you at this meeting, and see what your ideas were, see if you concurred with the direction from both the study and the staff is recommending, before having Mead and Hunt expend time and dollars doing concept design on the top 2 to 3 projects. So should this move forward as proposed, and we'll talk about this more later, those top 2 to 3 projects would move directly into concept design this year, functionally next month. So looking at the results from the Upper Valley Transit Enhancement Study, and I'll talk about these in more detail later, but I wanted to highlight that these were the infrastructure recommendations from the study itself. The first one, and these are in no particular order, the first one is the Maroon Creek Roundabout Down Valley Lane Channelization. And this is functionally a vertical separation in the Down Valley lane of the Maroon Creek Roundabout. Again, I'll talk about the details of this more later. One of the benefits is that it is easy to pilot, and that it would be combined with a transit Down Valley queue jump at Cemetery Lane. The second project was a buttermilk bicycle and pedestrian underpass that would eliminate the at-grade crossing for the bicyclists and pedestrians, along with facilitating a transit channelization at Owl Creek Road and Harmony Road. And then the third one is a shared use path between Buttermilk and Trescott, serving both the businesses and those residents along that corridor and providing them safe access to the existing BRT stops to that corridor. And then finally, functionally enforcing the HOV lane, and compliance in that HOV lane was one of their Mead and Hunt's recommendations. So then moving into the staff recommendation itself, this staff recommendation, again, is titled the Near-Term Transit Improvement Program. This program prioritizes 16 projects within 3 priority tiers, where Tier 1 has been identified as the highest value to dollar ratio and/or our important preliminary efforts. Tier 2 are lower value to dollar ratios and or are dependent on a Tier 1 effort. And Tier 3 are hold status projects, and those are hold status projects due to dependence on efforts outside the EOTC purview. They have significant costs or they have significant legal hurdles. Then we do have one fourth category, which is other efforts considered. These are efforts that we wanted to identify in here, that we did look at them and identify why we didn't prioritize them at this time. Not to say that they couldn't be prioritized in the future. And then finally, this last slide here, I wanted to highlight that the projects within each of the tiers are not otherwise prioritized. You've got 5 projects within Tier 1. You can functionally put those in any order. 4 projects in Tier 2, those can be in any order, and 4 projects in Tier 3. Similarly, those could be put in any order. And the projects themselves would be formally programmed on an annual basis through the EOTC work plan and budgeting process. And as you know, as these processes come before you, we take a number of things into account, including available funding, available partnerships, workload and capacity, both for the EOTC and staff, and relative compliance of all of the projects to the strategic plan, mission, vision, strategic goals, and guiding principles, along with the Comprehensive Valley Transportation Plan priorities. So the projects that are identified here in the near term would need to compete on an annual basis with all of the projects coming before you. So it's not to say that Tier 1 is going to be year 1. Tier 1 are the items that we're going to work to prioritize first from this greater list, relative to everything else that might be going on in a given year. So on the back end, you may recall that staff does, we have been scoring each of the projects annually. In terms of their compliance with the strategic plan and Comprehensive Valley Transportation Plan, we would do that with all of the existing projects and the projects within this program. And then this slide is to orient you and any of the public to the Transit Improvement Program itself. Run through this fairly quickly. So this is a snapshot here of the Tier 1 page. So this is the top part of the first page of the staff recommendation. Looking at the columns moving across, the project name, I think this is pretty self-explanatory. We established a descriptive name for each of the projects. The second column is the IMS tenant. So this identifies which of the 5 IMS tenants that this specific project is progressing. So this is how we've tied it back to the IMS itself. And then the third column here is project attributes. This identifies why this specific project has been prioritized within that specific tier. So in this case, we're looking at Tier 1. If you follow the blue line across, this is first priority. These are higher value to dollar ratio and or are important preliminary efforts. So those are the 2 reasons why a project can land in Tier 1, either a higher dollar value to ratio or it's an important preliminary effort. And this column identifies one of those reasons. The fourth column is the relative implementation cost. I think the important point here is that the dollar signs do not necessarily, they do not represent specific dollar amounts, but instead represent the relative cost, anticipated relative cost of the project to all of the 16 projects within this program. So a $1 sign shows that we anticipate it to be a lesser expensive project. $3 signs show that we expect it to be amongst the most expensive projects. And then notes, this is nuances and other things that we just thought should be identified within the staff recommendation. The blue lines, again, these represent the tier levels. And then at the end of the staff recommendation, you'll see there's a 1 asterisk. This is the value. So when you look at the tiers, it says higher value or lower value. This identifies what we mean by value. This defines what that value is. And then the 2 asterisks, again, this goes back to the projects that are proposed to move immediately into concept design by Mead and Hunt should this move forward. So in this slide here, you can actually see the top 3 listed projects within Tier 1 are the 3 projects that are proposed to move forward for concept plan design, and we'll go into the details here in a minute of each of these projects, but you can see the 2 asterisks after the project name. These next few slides, I do think that it's necessary to provide you a little bit of overview on each of these projects themselves. So I understand this can be a little tedious. I'm going to go through it as expeditiously as I can. And if you'd like to follow along, I'll go through them in the same order as they appear in the staff recommendation. So first Tier 1, and it'll run through the same order as that table. So within Tier 1, the first project listed there, this project is the Aspen Country Inn trail improvements to bicycle and pedestrian underpass and transit stops at Trescott and Buttermilk. This advances the BRT enhancements tenant and again is proposed to move forward in 2021 to concept design by Mead & Hunt. Functionally, this is a shared use path on approximately the south side of Highway 82 between Owl Creek Road and Trescott. Again, this is to serve the businesses and the residences on this side of the highway with those locations at Owl Creek Road and Trescott where there are protected bicycle and pedestrian crossings to both sides of the highway that offer access to both Up Valley and Down Valley BRT service. The exact limits of this trail or shared use path have not been defined yet, so that would need to be defined at the time of project development. I think it's also worth pointing out that it would not supplant the taxi and loo service, so that this is intended to complement it, not replace it. And from the staff perspective, we do see this as simply needed basic infrastructure in the area. The second listed project within Tier 1 is the design and feasibility review of the Maroon Creek Roundabout Down Valley channelization and Down Valley Q jump at Cemetery Lane. This advances the BRT enhancements tenant and is proposed to move forward in 2021 to concept design. In terms of physical attributes of this improvement, it consists of a down valley channelized lane through the roundabout. So again, that's a physical or a vertical physical barrier between the outside lane and the inside lane in the down valley direction through the roundabout itself, as well as a down valley Q jump at Cemetery Lane to work symbiotically with that channelization. This did model well with Mead & Hunt and that study itself. It did identify that because the roundabout, as we all know, is mixed traffic, that in order to move transit through the roundabout, we have to effectively make all traffic move through there more efficiently. And so this channelization showed that it can reduce conflict points for those vehicles entering the roundabout and want to move directly through and continue down Valley Highway 82 and eliminate that dwell time as they enter the roundabout. And I've got a cryptic graphic after this to show that. And then
Cryptic.
Yeah. Look like a giraffe.
Again, these haven't been
Traffic at the
moved on to
roundabout.
concept design yet, which would be the next step. And then finally, the next steps is a feasibility review and further design. So we do still need to look at methods for lane separation as well as radii analysis. So there are still some things that could disqualify this from moving forward altogether, but at this point at Model 12, and we would like to carry it through to the next step. A good point is that it could pilot relatively easily because it would not require any changes to pavement or curb cuts. And I do want to point out as well that it would not change anything with the anticipated 2022 roundabout reconstruction. So the earliest this could be implemented is 2023 following that reconstruction, and it would not change anything as a result of that reconstruction. And then this is my cryptic graphic. Well, Mead & Hunt put this together. This is, the red line here shows generally where that vertical barrier would be. So let's see if I don't know if I can get a cursor. I can. So if you're moving in the down valley direction here, we would have some signage approaching the roundabout saying the right lane is for through traffic. As you approach the roundabout, because of the vertical curb, you wouldn't need to slow down because you wouldn't be merging into traffic. Without having to slow down, that reduces overall dwell time for all of the vehicles moving through, and there's a good number of vehicles that are simply moving down valley and want to move through the roundabout and aren't looking to go to any of the other legs, which is part of the reason why at Model 12.
I thought it already said that. Doesn't it say that already?
And then to move on to the third listed, again, if you have questions about these, please keep.
Sorry, I'm
No.
it already
Please,
says that, I thought.
Just
It
keep
says
track of
that,
them.
but it's not channelized to make them do that.
Yeah.
So the third listed project within Tier 1. This is the design and feasibility review of the Harmony and Owl Creek Road Transit Signal Bypass Lane and Buttermilk Bicycle and Pedestrian Underpass. This progresses the BRT enhancements tenant and is also proposed to move forward in 2021 to concept design. So the three physical components of this is obviously the bicycle and pedestrian underpass at Buttermilk. This would remove the at-grade crossing that we currently have in place there. It would have a down valley transit channelization lane at Owl Creek Road, so transit would not have to stop at that signal in the down valley direction. In the up valley direction, there would be a transit channelization lane at Harmony Road, so transit would not have to stop at that signal. So the benefits here to transit is removing one of these two signals within their travel corridor, reducing that time on the transit side. The pedestrian phase would also be removed at the Owl Creek signal, so that would reduce overall dwell time for all traffic moving in the up valley and down valley direction, including transit. And then the bicycle and pedestrians would gain superior crossing protection at this location. Again,
So
this
that
does
is a
need.
new underpass?
This would be a new underpass,
Okay,
yes.
thank you.
So this does still require feasibility review and further design. So this is the one of the projects that we are proposing move forward in 2022 to that design, the initial design phase. And then I've got another cryptic graphic here for you. So in terms of the channelization, so this line here, we would have a grade or vertical curb or vertical separation between the general traffic lane and the bus lane at this location, allowing transit to move through and not have to stop at that signal. And then a similar improvement at Harmony Lane with a vertical lane separation between general traffic and the transit lane. And then we've also identified that with the removal of the at-grade crossing here, we would be able to move the curb back a little bit here, allowing transit to line up more appropriately from the turn lane and move directly into the Up Valley BRT lane. So this is similar to what you'll see at the Elgebel BRT stop, as well as Basalt BRT stop are currently designed this way, where they can move straight through from the turn lane on a green light only, obviously, and directly into that BRT stop.
We're gonna hold our questions. And I know you have to leave. You're coming to you first.
Okay.
David said he would be done, right?
You can questions if you need to.
I'm doing my best.
So hard not to ask the question.
So
I know Mayor Tory has to leave at 5:15, I
right,
think.
okay.
Feel free to
Do you
leave
want
any
me to-
questions and I can email you answers to.
We can make
going.
an exception if you'd like.
No,
You
it's all
sure?
good.
Okay. Looking at the last two projects within Tier 1, we've got HOV lane enforcement analysis. This obviously progresses the HOV lane enforcement tenant. This enforcement analysis is important to pursue other programs. So this is in here because it's an important preliminary program for other efforts. Specifically, ride sharing. An effective HOV lane is important because that is the carrot that we anticipate would draw people to ride sharing if they do have an effective HOV lane that can get them to their destination quicker. An analysis is necessary at this point in order to determine the most effective method for enforcement. If you recall, for those members that were on the EOTC in 2019, I did a quick overview of what the landscape looked like in terms of HOV lane enforcement, and at that time, we have staffing shortages on the sheriff's department side. They said, yes, we're eager, we would love to enforce, we just don't have the personnel. There's competing priorities that are of higher precedence. So at this point, and based on the information we have, I don't think that situation has changed. And then on the automated front, at that time in 2019, the automated technology was still experimental. It was only in place out in California. We had no automated HOV lane enforcement in Colorado. So there's some legal components there. We would need to evaluate where we are currently with automation and whether that is a possibility moving forward. So we do need an analysis to figure out the best path moving forward. It could be a combination of the two. It's also possible that it be implemented in phases. So there are some safety concerns that need to be considered in terms of the general traveling public. So we might, and available funding. So we might need to start it more in the up valley direction and continue it down valley with methods that prove to be effective. And then the final one here is an analysis of Up Valley and Down Valley BRT direct service to Snowmass Village. This progresses the BRT enhancements, and this would be an analysis to determine what kind of direct service to Snowmass will maximize ridership from both the Up Valley and Down Valley directions. So this analysis would evaluate the transit effectiveness, again, of that regional service to Snowmass, looking at cost, frequency, and expected utilization of any increase or enhanced service. So Snowmass is the second most utilized destination within RAFTA's service area. As you know, EOTC funded BRT connecting service. That has since been taken over by RAFTA as a part of 2040. So at this point, we feel as though instead of just throwing resources at it, we need to take a step back and look at, okay, at this point, we've got the services, where are our demand levels, how do we best address them? And then moving on to Tier 2, we have 4 projects within Tier 2. I should be able to move through these a little bit quicker than Tier 1. The first listed project is a pilot ride-sharing app for commuters. This is dependent, as we discussed earlier, on HOV lane enforcement. So that is the primary reason why ride-sharing is within Tier 2. We feel as though we need to tackle and spend our energy on HOV lane enforcement first. It's also in Tier 2 because RAFTA is currently undergoing what's called the First Last Mile Mobility Study, or FLMM, that is ongoing now. The exact results in terms of how it might tie back to ride-sharing isn't known at this point, but we'd like to use that study as a jump-off point for anything we might undertake. I do think it's worth pointing out, too, that the overall implementation cost of a ride-sharing app is unknown at this time. Whether we could tie on to an existing app, what that cost might be. We do know that creating a new app is very expensive. That's something that does need to be looked into, and as well as staff commitments to keep that program going. And then the second listed program within Tier 2, this is an analysis of regional ride-hailing and car-sharing service, progressing the ride-hailing tenant in the IMS. If you read through the study, you might have noticed that ride-hailing and car-sharing did not show, or showed limited VMT and greenhouse gas reduction effectiveness. That is the primary reason why this is in Tier 2. And in addition, same idea with the RAFTA's First Last Mile Mobility Study, is if we do get any direction from that, we would like to jump off from that point with ride-hailing and car-sharing. But we do feel as though there could be some appropriate deployment of ride-hailing and car-sharing in terms of progressing First Last Mile transit service all throughout the valley. And then the third and fourth listed within Tier 2 is additional permanent automated vehicle counters on Brush Creek Road, Owl Creek Road, Airport AABC, and Highway 82 in Pitkin County. We only currently have one permanent counter on Highway 82 in the Upper Valley, and that is at Castle Creek Bridge. And while that has been hugely invaluable, we believe that in order to continue to monitor VMT more effectively and comprehensively, we do need more permanent counters. So this is Tier 2 because obviously a counter does not reduce VMT or greenhouse gas emissions, but we do think it's important to be able to keep track of the programs in the long term. I think it's worth noting too that while we do list general locations here, the locations and technology have not been nailed down. So that would all be, and once we start diving into the project, those would be identified at that time. And then the fourth listed here is an analysis of valley-wide commuter parking, EV charging, ride-hailing and sharing, pickup and drop-off locations. This progresses ride-sharing, ride-hailing, and on parking pricing within the IMS. The purpose here is generally to identify how we can create or enhance parking and parking pricing, EV charging, and ride-sharing and hailing to enhance that transit rider interface. So to reduce that friction for riders that want to use transit and really encourage that first and last mile connection. So the goal with all of this is to incentivize that transit ridership. And again, we believe that we might be able to build off some of RAFTA's First Last Mile Mobility Study results with this study as well.
So do you think
then-
I could jump in here, David, just
Yeah.
because I do want Meritori, you leave at 5:15, right?
Yeah, about
Okay.
5:15 I've gotta go.
To weigh in on, since the Tier 1 and Tier 2 are probably more relevant for the conversation if he has questions or wants to
Yeah.
comment.
I so appreciate that, and mine are really quick, so hopefully this will just take a second. The question I had about the Owl Creek intersection and the pedestrian underpass was about the timing of that light. is it, I mean, you've got left and right turns coming off of Owl Creek. Does currently it have a separate cycle for pedestrians?
It does, yeah. So that pedestrian phase would be able to be eliminated as a part of that. So within the modeling, Mead and Hunt did look at the overall signal length and did some calculations to try to estimate how often that that pedestrian signal is being activated. And they calculated estimated transit and vehicle savings based on that.
Thank you. And then the only other comment that I really have here, because so much of this I find really intriguing and in a positive direction. I support a lot of this. One question that I'm led to is these seem to be suggested improvements from a study side of the equation, and I'm wondering what our outreach has been, or maybe what it should be on the other side, which is the demand. Who are we targeting? Are these measures necessarily effective when it really rubber hits the road, if you will? And I'm wondering if there's public data that we have, or have we learned anything about the user group that we are trying to focus on?
So Fair and Pierce did look at that. So they utilized the AirSage data that was gathered several years ago, that cell phone data, to look at origin and destination. And they, within the study itself, if you go back and look at that, it breaks out which travel market we have mostly coming in and out of the valley based on that data. It showed that predominantly our traffic is out of state, or not out of state, out of area visitors. So that is according to their study, that's the highest number of vehicles that we have on the road. The second, which isn't too far behind, is commuters. And as you know, we spent a lot of time focusing on commuters. This is still focusing on commuters for the most part.
Yeah.
Partly a good reason for that, I don't know if it's a good reason, but a reason for that is that commuters are much easier to target than out-of-town visitors who are coming in and they're driving here and they've got their car and there's a toll, they're going to pay the toll. If they're not as elastic as some of the commuters' trips are. So yes, we did look at that. We are cognizant that what we're presenting here is focused mostly on that commuter side.
Okay, thank you. That's all. And I might be able to stay, depending on what the weather's doing.
Okay, cool. All right. Bob, do you have a time
interest
constraint
now
where you're
between
leaving
water
us
needs and
early,
you.
or can we finish this part of the presentation before we get to questions and discussion? You're on mute, Bob Circus. All right, let's keep moving and we'll check in with
It's
Bob.
still on me.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, the last section here is going through the Tier 3 projects. So we've got 4 projects that are identified within Tier 3. The first one listed is the Service Center Road Signalization and Highway 82 Brush Creek Park and Ride to Airport Speed Limit Reduction. This was looked at to progress the BRT enhancement tenant. It had 2 goals. The main goal was to provide a protected crossing to the RAFTA stops that are currently on both sides of Highway 82 at Service Center Road. The second was to increase safety for vehicles on Highway 82, both entering the highway, both moving along the highway and entering the highway from Service Center Road. We identified that the signalization could achieve both of these goals, and models showed that there would be little to no congestion or increase in travel times. Bless you. Some of the things that bumped this into Tier 3 was that it was first not consistent with the currently approved CDOT access control plan, so we would need to modify that access control plan. And most importantly is that this is directly across from the general airport terminal area. And based on how that overall airport terminal is laid out and designed, we understood that it could either increase the need for this signal or it could totally negate the need for the signal. So we didn't want to prioritize at this time. We didn't feel as though we had enough information based on the terminal side to make that, to move this forward right now. The second listed is an extension of HOV lanes in the up valley direction at the airport and in the up valley direction just down valley from the Maroon Creek Roundabout. So this was looked at as with the goal of improving transit times at these two congestion points, just moving into the roundabout and at the airport. The overall this would convert limited sections of the current bus-only lanes to HOV lanes at the airport and Maroon Creek Roundabout. I think it's important to note here that the model, again, did assume that the HOV lanes were appropriately enforced or adequately enforced. So staff has significant concerns about this if we do not have effective HOV lane enforcement. I think for obvious reasons, that would effectively just be converting it into a general purpose lane if we don't have that in place. In addition to that, we had several other concerns. One, that if it was shown to not be effective, we were concerned that there could be political reasons that could make it more
You'd never
difficult
get it back.
to convert it back to a bus-only lane. And then also, the EOTC did pay to construct these bus-only lanes through the transit sales and use tax, and that as a requirement for that transit sales and use tax, it has to be spent to support transit. So if we're devolving a bus-only lane to even an HOV lane, it's staff's opinion at this point that we would likely, the transit sales and use tax would need to be refunded those construction dollars, even on a pro rata basis for that section. So the source of those funds would be unknown. I'm not too sure who would repay that to the transit sales and use tax. So that's a notable issue. And then finally, but certainly not least, is that it could be in conflict with the Federal Highways Administration Record of Decision. So we would need to be very serious about this if we wanted to go down this direction. So for all of those reasons, we said yes. We acknowledge that the modeling shows that it could reduce congestion and speed up transit times, but we have significant concerns and we're not looking to prioritize it in Tier 1 or Tier 2 at this time. And then the third listed is dynamic road pricing. This one is really cordon pricing or managed hot lanes. This is progressing the congestion reduction measure of the IMS. The goal here is to reduce vehicle miles traveled and greenhouse gas emissions. So the two studied methods to implement dynamic road pricing, again, are cordon pricing, and that's where all lanes going past a certain point, in this case presumably Aspen, would be tolled. And the other option was a managed or high occupancy toll, also known as a hot lane. That's where one lane is tolled, open to transit, high occupancy vehicles, and then priced accordingly to keep free flow conditions through that lane for single occupant vehicles. If you went through the study, you might have noticed that the cordon pricing was shown to be most effective in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions than the managed or hot lane. However, it also has greater equity, legal, and social hurdles to clear before it could be implemented. And looking at the state and federal law requirements for both of these, it's highly likely that we would need to do a new environmental impact statement. Neither of these were contemplated in the environmental impact statement and are certainly not a part of the record of decision for the entrance to Aspen or the basalt to Buttermilk sections of Highway 82. So I can say with a fairly high level of confidence they would be looking at a new EIS and record of decision. In addition to that, for a cordon toll, we would first need to change state law. So state law, based on the study results, show that there is no cordon pricing within Colorado currently, so we would need to first enable that within state law, and then move into the EIS and record of decision. So it's by no means a simple process. In addition to that, there are significant organizational and physical infrastructure requirements for either of these. I think that people often think, oh, tolling, that's simple, that's not a high infrastructure need. There is a significant amount of infrastructure that needs to go into that, and a significant amount of back-end organization and, for lack of other word, bureaucracy behind it in order to support that process and project. And then on the equity side, both of them do have notable equity impacts, particularly to lower wage earners living outside Aspen if say a cordon toll is in and out of Aspen. There are ways to help mitigate that, where you funnel the toll funding back into increasing transit service through that corridor. So there are ways to mitigate it. I don't think you can mitigate it for everybody. But that is the recommendation within the study itself, and I think that is the staff recommendation at this point, should it move forward, that any excess funds above or funding that does come in from the tolling above keeping the project alive go back into enhancing that transit service. And then finally, simply due to the complexity of implementation, staff is recommending that cordon pricing and managed hot lanes be considered as a long-term planning effort, similar to the entrance to Aspen. And as mentioned earlier, staff is anticipating a retreat for the EOTC in 2022, as we do think that we're at a point now. We had our last retreat in 2019. We've made it through all of the action items that came out of that retreat at this point, and I think the next step is really starting to dive into some of these longer term items. So in October, you can expect that we'll propose a date to you for that retreat next year. And then the final project within Tier 3, this is Sageway Sidewalk extension. This is simply a sidewalk extension in the AABC that was identified as being missing. This is an important connection to transit. It wasn't identified to be done in Tier 1 or Tier 2 because it's also impacted by the CDOT access control plan in this area, and depending on the exact alignments of roadways and other improvements out in that area, we didn't want to put something in that could ultimately be in the wrong location or be torn out. So we were looking for further implementation of the access control plan before moving forward with this sidewalk extension. And then finally, I promise these are the last three to cover, and I'll cover these quickly. These are the other efforts considered that were not otherwise prioritized within the program. The first one is signal timing. This was looking at advanced signal timing technology. This may show promise on a larger corridor-wide basis, maybe from Glenwood Springs up to Aspen, but within this limited study area, it showed limited effectiveness. The second one is the airport terminal BRT routing. I would highlight with this that this study was limited to how do we maintain current BRT times if we were going to route it directly to the airport terminal. Functionally, that outcome showed that BRT needs unimpeded access to the airport terminal in order to maintain times. That would likely be a grade separated underpass for the BRT accessing that terminal. It did not look at other operational issues such as luggage, should that be accommodated on BRT service, or other options, so say shuttle services serving the airport specific to when planes are landing and serving, say, hotels or that kind of thing. So on the staff side, we believe that more research is necessary before we come forward with the formal staff recommendation in terms of BRT service to the airport itself. And then finally, we had a Hawk Beacon at Aspen Country Inn. This was looked at as a way to supplant the Aspen Country Inn taxi and loo service. At the end of the day, we came to the conclusion that it was a high expense for the anticipated level of utilization at that location. Although this is the FHWA approved device for bicycle and pedestrian crossings on high-speed multi-lane highways. So at this time, on the staff side, we believe that resources are better allocated toward the trail connection and a buttermilk underpass. And finally, make it to the end of that slideshow. And so staff does recommend accepting the staff proposed 2021 EOTC near-term transit improvement program as administrative direction. I just want to highlight at the end here that we are not allocating any funding as a part of any acceptance here, and we're not doing any work planning at this point. We're simply prioritizing for staff to know that we're all on the same page as we move into programming and budgeting this year and for the next subsequent few years. I would also note that Fair and Peers staff is on the line if you have any questions about the study itself, as is Mead and Hunt. So we are able to divert back to them if necessary.
Okay, thanks, David. So what we'll do?
Nice.
Yeah.
Great
and
job.
you hit time.
Did I?
Yeah. I mean, with accommodating questions. So, what we're going to do? Let's do questions about all of this. Then we'll go to a public hearing. We'll bring it back for discussion, and we'll take votes of our jurisdictions. So I'm actually going to go to the Zoom first and do questions, then I'll do the room, and then we'll do the reverse for the next topic. So folks who are joining us electeds who are joining us via Zoom, we'll go to you guys. I see Bob Circus with your hand up. We could not hear you before, Bob, so please make sure you unmute. And then I'll go to Greg and then Ward.
Okay, thank you. David, thank you for that presentation. It's certainly got a lot in it. I'd like to talk about, I have questions really about the three primary projects that you're proposing to move on, and I'll try to do them in the same order as they are. The Aspen Country Inn project, does that project include an underpass between the two bus stops at Truscott? Because they're actually opposite each other on Highway 82, and it would be, from what I understand, much more convenient than people getting off at the golf course and walking in one direction, or getting off at Buttermilk and walking in the other direction.
So are you talking about an underpass at Aspen Country Inn itself?
Yeah, that's where the Truscott, isn't that where the Truscott bus stops are?
Truscott is up valley a little bit from Aspen Country Inn. So this would not include an
Okay.
underpass at Aspen Country Inn.
Well, there are two bus stops at Aspen Country Inn, is that correct?
There's an up valley and a
They
down
certainly look
valley.
like it when I drive down 82.
There's an up valley and a down valley bus stop at Aspen Country Inn. They're not BRT stops, they're local stops.
Yeah, and Truscott's on this side of the Maroon Creek Bridge, Country Inn's on the other side.
Yes.
I think he might be confusing the two.
Gotcha.
Well, yeah, okay. Yeah, thank you, Rachel. So this study,
I've noticed that.
was directed towards BRT only, I guess, right? BRT enhancement doesn't include local enhancement. So the problem that I have, or I see with that from talking to some residents of Pomegranate, is that people will just walk down. They may or may not use the sidewalk, because right now when they go down valley, they will cross, or they will attempt to cross 82. So I just want to put that out there, and then we can get back into that in discussion later. My question about the Owl Creek and Harmony setup. The Up Valley Owl Creek channelization lane, you said was going to be the turn lane to make a right turn on Owl Creek. So my question is, won't that be backing up cars trying to make a right turn into Buttermilk, particularly in the wintertime? And why is that necessary? Why can't the bus just go to the traffic light and then move across to the Up Valley bus stop?
So this was one of the lesser priorities within this overall project. So this is, again, similar to the BRT design at Elgebel and Basalt, where the bus service is able to use the turn lane, move directly straight through, which lines them up better for the BRT stop itself. I think that that's, your questions are some that we would need to hash through more at the time of design. So this was identified as a possibility, but I wouldn't say that this is a make or break design item within this overall scheme. The main things is that.
I don't think it either. I'm just curious as to why it was set that way. But and then the last question I have, relative to the HOV lane enforcement, I look at that and I think about that kind of, to me, is if we have to prioritize these in tiers, I think it would be much more valuable to have these automated additional vehicle counters on these different parts of the road. We would get much more information about them about the traffic patterns in those areas. And I think the HOV lane enforcement, since we pretty much know that we can't do anything about it now, if it moved to tier 2, it could be just included with the other part of that HOV lane enforcement overall project. So those are my comments. Thank you again, David.
Do you have any reply? Good?
I don't think so.
Okay. All right, we'll go on to Greg, Ward, and then Steve, and then we'll come to the room here.
Great, thank you. I'll be as quick as I can. I was looking for, and I saw earlier just a little bit about the cemetery lane. I thought I saw a cemetery lane turn for Down Valley, and the scope of that project, when I think about it, seems so minimal. It's like, why are we even talking about it? Let's just do it. But that's me. Just a comment there. It's like, I'm not sure how detailed that needs to be. But the question I have is really what assumptions need to be revisited here? What has changed since these studies? And one thing in particular is that we've all become telecommuters to a great extent, given, the Zoom conference as an example. And I'm just wondering, can we break down our commuter studies and our out-of-area visitor studies to look at the greater detail? How much of it is actually construction worker traffic, and what solutions might we have for construction workers commuting? How much is office worker, service worker, hotel staff, realtors, skiers, local recreators? They're kind of like local tourists. They're coming to be recreators, but they need to get there, clearly. How can we break this down and really look at it? Regarding commuters, could we make a huge dent in the number of commuters by incorporating Zoom into this? Because I think all of these solutions are great, and I support them all, and I don't think they're going to be enough. And so I'm trying to figure out how we can reduce the number of cars on the road before they even leave for this destination. So that was a question mostly about cemetery lane, and then the assumptions on how much can we really break down this study to a greater degree.
Zoom with your nail
Thanks.
gun.
So, Greg, in terms of the telecommuters, Fair and Peers did dig into that in terms of how much we might be able to see commuters convert over to telecommuters. The main outcome was that, yes, we will be able to see some, but we're predominantly an economy where people aren't able to telecommute. So the expectation is that we would see some reduction, but not as much as, say, other economies that might be more tech-based or something like that. So in the modeling that Fair and Peers did, that was a piece of their modeling. Beyond that, I would have to defer back to, I believe Marissa Millam is from Fair and Peers is on the line, who did that modeling, and she'd be able to fill you in more detail. To hit on the cemetery lane, yes, it's a fairly simple change, but we do still need to go through permitting with CDOT, so there is still some design, and there's more process that needs to be gone through before we can actually do that queue jump.
Can you explain for me what the queue jump is? Because I'm not clear.
Yeah. So a queue jump is effectively where a transit vehicle, if there's imagine you're at a stoplight and there's a long line of vehicles, the transit vehicle is able to go into the turn lane and go up to the front of the queue, and then when the light changes, it then merges back in with the other traffic, so that it's able to jump that queue.
So it's an additional lane.
It doesn't require any additional lanes. That's one of the benefits to it. So it's actually in place now all up and down the valley. So if you ride the bus, I see drivers do it all the time at Basalt, El Jabal, Willits. There's queue jumps all through there, and they're utilized pretty extensively.
They kind of say right lane must turn right, except buses accept it, and they just
Exactly.
keep going straight.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, Greg, your hand is still up. I think you're done. Okay. Ward and then Steve.
Yeah, thank you. Hello, all of you. First of all, I'm really surprised that the number one congestion is from out-of-towners. That really surprises me, but I suggest that there's not much we can do about what the out-of-towners are going to do, but I think we should, so I think we should focus on what we can make a dent on. And then would be the number two congestion is the commuters. I'm in favor of the HOV enhancements and enforcement. I suspect that automated might be more feasible now, but to adding more employees is a very difficult thing. So an analysis of automated versus employees, sheriff's departments to do the enforcement of the HOV, but I think it needs to be enforced. I really do like to channelize through the roundabout and from Cemetery Lane up to basically the golf course, I guess. And I do have some questions, as Bob did, about the All Creek underpass. I don't know if it's RAFTA or EOTC that looked at this a few years ago, and the ski company wasn't interested in partnering with this because they felt that there wasn't enough traffic at that location, pedestrian traffic at that location to justify the expense of an underpass. When you look at a Google map of this or from the satellite view, a few hundred yards down valley is the Rio Grande underpass, and a few hundred yards up valley is a stage road underpass, which would allow people to get on the trail that goes from the ABC all the way into town. So I wonder if we could look at, I like to channelize traffic for BRT for the buses, but I wonder if the huge expense, because there are a lot of utilities, the huge expense of an underpass for pedestrian and bicycle is justified, and if we could extend on-grade connectors to the Rio Grande at the end of the runway and stage road that goes over towards Tyack to make a connection to the trail that's on the golf course or on the Maroon. I guess it's the north side. I've only lived in town 45 years, and I still can't remember if that's east, north, if that's north or if that's west. But the Nordic Center side of the highway, as you're going down valley on the right, to make that connection. So sorry for not being very articulate on that, but a real study to see what the volume of pedestrian and bicycle traffic is at that location, and if that really justifies the huge expense of an underpass, or if just on-grade connectors to the existing pedestrian bicycle underpasses that are already there in either direction. Thank you.
Thanks, Ward. Do you want to respond?
Yeah, in terms of the underpass, the main reason why the underpass was included here wasn't because we understand that there is a notable number of bicyclists and pedestrians that cross here. But we do understand, based on it was an EOTC commission study that was done in 2018, just a couple months before I came on. And that at that time, the bicycle and pedestrian traffic did not warrant an underpass at this location. So if you recall, the EOTC did commission a concept design at that time. Anything that goes forward at this point would build off whatever we already have, by the way. This was reintroduced again because we can't do the channelization of the transit lanes without an underpass. Because we do need to eliminate that at-grade crossing. So if transit is not going to be stopping, then we can't have an at-grade bicycle and pedestrian crossing. So we need to grade separate. So if we keep the at-grade crossing, we also lose the channelization. So they kind of work hand in hand in this case.
Yeah, I guess my point is that you can eliminate the crossing there. If people are going across Highway 82, they could walk or bicycle a couple hundred yards. But if people won't go a couple hundred yards and to save millions of dollars, I guess that's not something we can affect. It just seems like a waste of money for just the pedestrian and bicycle.
We can affect it by not putting it in.
Thanks,
That would
Ward.
affect it.
All right. Question, Steve, and then Greg, I see your hand went back up.
I just had a response to Ward.
Okay, Steve Child, go ahead, and then Greg will go to you.
So I've got a couple of questions. One has to do with the HOV enforcement. David, are you differentiating between the enforcement down through the airport area, maybe as far as Brush Creek Road versus enforcement from Brush Creek Road to Basalt? Or are you looking at doing enforcement the whole way?
So right now, that idea is open for discussion, and I don't think that we need to decide here. It's something that we would need. Should it be prioritized, we'd figure it out at the time that we'd be undertaking the study. So right now, the idea is basalt up. Any place where we have an HOV lane, we need to be looking at what is an effective enforcement measure. But we acknowledge that we might need to start up valley again, maybe on a pilot basis. Maybe those are the only staff resources that we have available to do that section. So we need to look at that. But I think that going into it, we need to evaluate the whole corridor from basalt up.
Okay, and the reason I ask, I think that in the up valley portion, in the vicinity of the airport down to Brush Creek, it could be very effective the way you have laid it out on the ride sharing and getting people to, because that's where the congestion is where the bottleneck is, where the traffic grinds to a halt by the airport. From Brush Creek down, I would say that enforcement of speed limit would be much more beneficial to the public. Right now it's dangerous because you have people going 70 miles an hour in a 55-mile zone and not being pulled over for speeding there. People weaving in and out, and it's dangerous down there. Second question has to do with the channelization through, I think you're indicating it's through the roundabout. We're doing this whole project, the repaving, rebuilding of the roundabout. Is this channelization taken into effect in the project, that we're doing with CDOT right now?
So it's important to remember that this channelization and the roundabout reconstruction are two separate and distinct projects. So the roundabout reconstruction, which we'll actually talk about next, is the next action item, that is slated to move forward if they secure appropriate funding in 2022. We still need further analysis, and the earliest this could come online would be 2023 if everything worked out. There would also be no impacts to the newly reconstructed roundabout as a result of this channelization.
Okay, and then one final thought in terms of the Buttermilk pedestrian underpass. I don't think it would be spending perhaps $7 million, and I don't think it would accomplish what we're trying to achieve. The buses going down valley at that point are already, they're in the bus only lane. They might have to stop for the light, but they're able to go through there quickly, and they're already out of the traffic in town. The bus traffic is moving quickly. Going into town, you could speed the traffic up at the Buttermilk crossing by, doing the things you've suggested. And then everybody's going to have, that means they get to the roundabout sooner and then wait longer at the roundabout versus having to wait a little bit at Buttermilk. So cost effectiveness, I don't think it would accomplish what we want to achieve. It would make it safer for pedestrians would be the one benefit I could see. And that's all I've got.
Okay, thank you, Steve. I will go ahead. Let's go to comments here in the room, and then Dan Blankenship, I see your hand up. We'll go to you you may have more questions to answer. All right, directors in the room. Patty.
Did Greg have a response to Ward? Did he want to?
He took his hand down. Greg.
Oh, thanks. I don't know if I put my hand. Oh, it logged me out for a sec. The response was, I'm wishing that SKICO was at the table with us here. If you look at buttermilk, if we could include buttermilk in this view, which I know you can't, Dave, regarding that intersection, it just seems that the location of that crossing isn't really convenient for pedestrians and skiers to get to buttermilk. It's pretty damn far across the parking lots. I'm just wondering if we could work with SKICO to reorient the design and even maybe relocate that stop, which would be much cheaper than building an underpass. You know, it's possible they could enter Buttermilk somewhere farther to the south, closer to that underpass that exists on Stage Road, to the south of the Aspen and Country Inn. They could perhaps make a new plan that would still work for Buttermilk, and maybe an improvement. Just wanted to say that if they were at the table, we might have some different solutions. And finally, as I understand this, the channelization simply doesn't work in the winter, right? So we're talking about a 2 or 3 season solution regarding channelization. And as much as I like the idea of channelizations, I just wonder if it's really going to get us the outcome we seek.
So on the SKICO piece, so right now, obviously this is very preliminary. The next steps with design and everything is making those contacts and developing those partnerships in terms of moving this forward. So they would be at the table later on. You know, right now we're just saying this is what the modeling has shown has worked well. For the channelization at the Maroon Creek Roundabout, that channelization would be, at this point, contemplated to be summer only, primarily because of snow removal. However, during the summer, that is our highest traffic peak season. So that's summertime is when we really need to be making those dents in the traffic. In terms of the effectiveness of the channelization, I do see Paul Silberman on the line here. I'd like to give, he's with Mead and Hunt, I'd like to give him a chance to chime in here on overall effectiveness of the Buttermilk Underpass and those channelizations at Harmony and Owl Creek.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. I'm Paul Silberman with Mead and Hunt. So the picture on the screen, if you all are still looking at the screen, you know, the channelizations up valley and down valley, it's really separate. So coming up valley, the bus would get behind a vertical barrier and not have to stop at the signal. If it didn't stay in the turn lane where you turn right onto Owl Creek, it would get into the bus only lane and continue just as it does today. It's really 2 separate things. Coming down valley, you know, the channelization would bypass the Owl Creek signal, and then they'd have to stop at Harmony. You know, there might be some ways with some more complex traffic signal phasing to maintain the crosswalk and the channelization for the down valley. The main thing is, you know, we were with Dave and the you know, other representatives. We walked the job. We saw the people, you know, getting off and lugging their skis across the street at the signal, you know, and the double lefts and the right turns and all that stuff. And, you know, when they push that button to call the walk indication, you know, that typically, you know, puts a longer green for Owl Creek Road. So the traffic backs up, you know, heading down valley, it backs up past the airport. And that just compounds throughout the hour, you know, as those people get on and off and, you know, in and out of the Buttermilk lot and the bus stops. In terms of the channelization in the roundabout, Maroon Creek, that is highly, highly effective. And it's all because of, it eliminates that friction, you know, with the traffic coming from Maroon Creek and Castle and then turning from down valley into Maroon Creek and Castle. And it gives, you know, even a 5 mile an hour, 10 mile an hour increase in speeds through that roundabout can pump hundreds more cars and buses through that roundabout in a single hour. And the model shows 10 minutes of travel time savings for cars and 2 minutes of travel time savings for buses from downtown Aspen to Brush Creek. So that is a big, big model benefit, and it's super cheap to do, like David said. So, you know, we're highly encouraging that recommendation, even if it's just seasonal, you know, to really clear out the problems that y'all have been mentioning.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Let's go to Tom here on Zoom, and then Patty in the room has been waiting. Tom, go ahead.
Okay, well, thank you. I just want to join others that have commented about, have concerns about the underpass at Buttermilk. I understand the logic to it, but it seems like a lot of money just to achieve a slight improvement of bus service. And I would really question that would be a good use of funds until I could really see more about that. So that's all. I just wanted to add that.
Okay, thank you, Tom. All right, we'll go to questions here in the room, and then again, public comment period, and then a vote. Patty.
Yeah, as far as buttermilk, since we were talking buttermilk a lot, I know Greg and I have both walked the buttermilk side, the Aspen side, to the Maroon Creek Club underpass. Pretty easy fix right there. The next section up to the old Maroon Creek Bridge or the new Maroon Creek Bridge, there's significant stormwater drainage issue there, lots of manhole drainage covers down into the gully, so that would be a little bit more engineering. There's also an issue with using the underpass because it was constructed, I believe, by the Maroon Creek Club. I walked that the other day and almost got run over twice by golf carts. So we have a conflict where we're going to have to channelize the underpass to keep the golf carts on one side and the pedestrians and the bikes on the other. It was pretty scary because they're quiet. You don't hear them coming up behind you. So we're going to take people off the highway and they're going to get run over by a golf course. So we need to keep that in mind.
Yeah. Bike ride.
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty scary. It scared the out of me. But channelization, I think, is worth a try, but I think we're going to have conflicts with people who still are in the wrong place and try and cut back in on the wrong, to come back over. Because there's signage there now that says, if you're going to go straight through, you're in this lane. People aren't abiding by it, and they're always trying to cut through, and then they figure they can cut back in again. Use of the sheriffs for enforcement of the HOV lane. We have talked to the sheriff multiple times. Not only is not on their list of priorities as far as their patrol duties. Again, we don't have sheriffs now to accomplish what we need to, and trying to hire more sheriffs is not in the picture for any time soon. So that's going to be a tough nut to crack. Funding, I'm going to look at you, Dave, on the funding issue. The Transportation Regional Planning, TPR?
IMTPR?
Yeah. That isn't, I know George Newman pushed for this underpass at Owl Creek for years. He drove it home to try and get us plan on the shelf for it so we could get funding through them. There was no money there. No. I'm wondering if now with the new transportation bill we'll see more money flowing this way. I was not able to, because I'm the new rep, was not able to make that meeting and have not been able to debrief after the meeting, but that's an opportunity. But it is more than just an underpass. There are massive amounts of utilities in there. You'd have to reconfigure the trail, the bus stop, etc. It is a dangerous intersection for pedestrians and bike riders because people turning right to come up Valley just don't look to see if there's anybody in the crosswalk. I've almost been hit there a couple of times coming and going from that parking lot. But I think it's something we still need to think about. But I think the quicker thing we need to do is get bikes and pedestrians, especially bikes, to build them a trail to the underpass at Maroon Creek and work something out with the Maroon Creek Club. So we can, there's already an underpass there. More difficult to put the underpass down Valley that connects with Harmony because it's FAA and there's wetlands, et cetera, on that other side down Valley. So people could, we've talked about that because there's already an underpass there also. So we need to keep in mind we have multiple underpasses there. How can we better utilize the ones we have for the convenience of pedestrians and bike riders and people that need to come and go from Buttermilk? Or we're trying to increase the capacity of people using the Buttermilk parking lot for commuters. We need to make that a safe passage and an easy passage for them to get up and down Valley. So that's pretty much all I have to say. Thank you for the opportunity.
So Rachel, then Francie, and then I'll be looking for other hands in the room here.
Okay, great. I have a couple of questions that we may or may not have answers to right now. But I wasn't sure if any of the lane that were shown would require any new open space votes. Were we working to the extent we're widening anything or anything within what we have as an open space allotment already? So that was just good. I wanted to make sure. I wasn't sure with the extra lanes and the slip lanes.
No, there are no, being near term, that was one of the requirements that we gave Mead and Hunt was that there is no widening.
No widening?
Yes.
Okay, so, because if there were, that land on either side is city open space, and then you have to have a 4F open space vote to be able to use it. I'd like to examine, and again, it doesn't have to have a question now answered, but can we use half-cent money for enforcement if we were to allocate and pay someone to do enforcement of the HOV lanes? And could we, I hate to say deputize, but how can you give someone the authority through state patrol or City of Aspen Police or whatever? But I think that is a fundamental piece of any of these things being successful. And, I understand the hiring problems, there's no question about it, but maybe if it was someone who was solely focused on that and wasn't about all the other things a sheriff's officer has to do. But I think we should examine that, and even if you have somebody just 3 days a week, you never know which 3 days of the week it's going to be, and you start having people comply with the rules of the road. I fully support getting the vehicle mile travel counters popped up into tier 1. I think knowing data where we're going is so critically important, and it's much simpler. I understand maybe it's just the temporary ones, maybe it's the 18 feet under the ground so the snowplows don't catch them, expensive ones. But let's start counting, and we have to count Power Plant Road, because there's absolutely no way for us to know what's really going on the entrance without knowing how much traffic is bypassing the entrance on purpose. So that is just a real priority for me. When we talk about automated ticketing, for enforcement, I've seen them put them in places in Denver and other states, and I've seen them rip them back out. The video ticketing, you just get a ticket in your mail when you get home, versus the officer or person who tells you why and maybe gives you a warning the first time and asks you please not to do it. But people just, charge their city councils and petitions and votes on it, and the community seems to hate the idea they're being spied on by a camera. I don't know why. I really look forward to understanding more of the dynamic of how many people we need to move on a bus to maintain the no congestion goal or the limited congestion goal. What is the mode split we have to maintain? How fast and how much? And that gets us back to how many more drivers and how many more buses, and what is this is going to deliver once we've created the right pavement, because we're talking mostly about pavement now. So how does the rest of the system work in? And then, I was noticing throughout the presentation, which is appropriately so, to have the demand management elements there, which is what paid parking is. And I was there for the first paid parking vote when we put it in place, and I think it was $1 an hour. I think it was pretty cheap back then. But what are we at now? 8 in the core? We start to ask 6. I have it right.
6
During certain times of day, the peak times. How much more disincentive are we going to be able to make, and not, just have that reputation of what Aspen is so expensive. You really just can't come here at all. For a lot of people, it's starting to feel that way. Where, when are we going to have robot workers? That's what I'm wondering. How many people are going to start investing in more of the automated burger flippers that they're inventing, and shelf stockers that are doing it in other places? At what point is it worth it for anyone to want to come up here and deal with all this? But the final would be, I support the managed lanes. I really think you have to take a hard look at the Buttermilk Underpass. I know it's a lot of money. How much is a child or two's life worth? Because it's going to be the cost we pay one day. I mean, I've just seen it out there. It's way too dangerous. And the Sage Way underpass was put in the wrong place. I mean, I don't know who thought that was a great idea to move it so far away from the ski area, but I don't see people with boots and skis and toddlers and things like that walking 300 yards to use an underpass to go get a bus. I would drive, instead of doing that. You just, once you have those kids. So, I want to continue at least to study the Buttermilk Underpass. I can't rule it out. And, I think that it's I think the point was made, which is very good, that if you move this forward a little faster, they're just going to get to the roundabout and hit mixed traffic sooner. And almost every one of these solutions still comes back to, what are you going to do on the entrance to Aspen? Yep. And that's where $7 million might really do something. Those are my thoughts on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Francie?
I have some really quick questions, David, and then I have a few comments. This is questions and comments?
You know, it seems to be mixing, so we'll just do that, and
do
I'll make
that?
sure we check
Okay.
in with anyone
All
who
right, I
didn't
just wanted
get
to
their
check with you.
chance after we do public comment, which I
Okay.
know there's folks here interested for that.
So
So
I've
please
got
go
these
ahead.
numbered, and it's kind of confusing, but first of all, I can see a tremendous amount of work from the staff behind you in what you presented today, so I just wanted to thank them for the incredible amount of research and the way this was put together and the way it was presented to us. It's pretty impressive, so thank you very much, guys. So my first question would be, well, what is cordon pricing?
Cordon pricing is, you can think of it as a toll when you're going, you know, any place, say, in this case, I think we'd say that into Aspen on Highway 82. Regardless of the lane you're in, you pay X number of dollars in order to just continue on.
So it's one of those overhead things that takes a picture of your license plate kind of thing?
There's a number of different technologies. I think that is the exact technology I think is up for
Okay.
consideration.
Okay. So with that, I think that we could incentivize or possibly fine, on the other end of it, employers. So like you mentioned, the equity piece. Well, you have an employer that has a bunch of employees coming up from as far as, you know, Newcastle or whatever. And so we incentivize the employers, or actually I'm thinking it would involve ComDev. So I'm thinking a lot about the construction people. And so they have to provide vans as part of their mitigation. So they pay a housing mitigation fee, they have to pay a traffic mitigation fee, or they can provide vans so that their employees ride up together, or they have to insist that 4 employees get in a truck together, or they get fined, or something like that. And if we had cordon pricing, then we could encourage employers to pay those cordon fees, and they could have, you know, one of those little pass things like they have back east for, you know, how you get charged for this. So that was one idea I had to help with that, and it would have to go through ComDev, I guess, and maybe through the Aspen building permit system. But I do think that a traffic mitigation system with employers would help them create more ride sharing. So that was one question. And hawk beacons, is that like a thing that takes a picture? Now there's a car here, switch the light?
No, hawk beacons, they've been around for a long time, but there's just not too many of them around. They kind of function like a railroad crossing. So you hit a button, you want to cross a highway, right? You hit the button and it flashes lights up above, so looks like a signal in order to stop traffic in both directions. So it's the approved traffic device for crossing by federal highways as a part of the MUTCD for high-speed multi-lane highways. So you wouldn't. The other equivalent that we use is the rectangular rapid flashing beacons that are in town. You know, where you hit the button and they flash yellow. They're right out here, yeah. But those don't work on high-speed multi-lane highways.
Yeah, right. Okay. And then I wanted to talk a little bit about the underpass, the whole buttermilk thing. Now, I probably don't have a very good understanding of the pedestrians that use the underpass. I'm sure some of them are Burlingame skiers. But if some of them are people that are crossing to get to the bus to go home down Valley, it's too bad Ski-Co's not here, because couldn't Ski-Co have a bus that goes to the intercept lot for the buttermilk people, so they don't have to cross the road there, or they don't have to walk down to the next underpass to catch a bus? Couldn't we ask Ski-Co to provide a down Valley bus as far as the intercept lot as a possibility for dealing with some of that traffic? I don't know what to say about the Burlingame people, but yeah.
A lot of those employees live right there.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. That's what I don't know.
They live at the
how
Maroon
many of them
housing,
are-
or they live at
yeah.
the Burlingame Road, so a lot of them just have to cross the
So
street.
maybe what has to happen there is that, one possibility would be that Ski-Co then provides them with lockers so that when they go, they can walk down to the next underpass pretty easily. Instead of walking in their ski boots and carrying their skis, they could lock up their ski boots and their skis and walk home in sneakers. So just a thought that to avoid that underpass there,
I think you
because
bring up a great point of really understanding who is crossing there now. Additionally, there's throughout the valley, all the parents who send their kids up on Saturdays on the bus, so they're only trying to get to the bus,
Yeah.
not to the intercept.
right. So so anyway, if the ski co could get involved with getting those people or us from Buttermilk to the intercept lot to avoid that would be one thought. Another quick question is, what is taxi in lieu?
So the Aspen Country and Taxi in Lieu, that is a service that EOTC pays for, functionally kind of like what you're suggesting, only through High Country or High Mountain Taxi. And what we do, so if someone lives at Aspen Country Inn and they want to go, so I get my directions right, they can catch the bus going into Aspen because that stop is on their side.
On the same side.
But if they're coming back and they would need to get off and there's no crossing back over to Aspen Country Inn, they can get a taxi from town back to their house, and EOTC pays for that taxi ride.
How many people live there?
I don't know that.
How many people are we servicing?
Not sure how many.
Just so you know, when the bus lanes were put in, there was a decision of the EOTC not to put an underpass in because it would have cost over $500,000, and people felt that it'd be better to just pay for the taxi service in perpetuity because it's a senior and low-income priority housing complex. Yes.
Okay, I see.
And so we had an opportunity to spend the money for an underpass while the whole road was getting done, and the group decided not to. And so that was the permanent commitment to those residents.
So the taxi goes to Buttermilk, does a U-turn and comes back and drops them off or something like that?
No, it drops them, it takes them, it makes a left turn going west. It makes a left turn into the complex and then comes back out and goes
Yeah,
wherever the
okay.
taxi. And they can call it. I think Pomegranate people use it too.
Okay.
Costs
That's a really interesting little,
I don't think they get the
Thing.
freebie, they should.
It costs the OTC about $4,000 to $7,000 a year to run.
that's all?
There's not
4
many
to
uses.
7?
Yeah.
Okay. And then I have a question, sort of a general question. It's really just putting it out there. You don't need to answer this, David, but I wonder what effect this would have on the tourists. You know, I mean, like, how can we get those people who drive to Snowmass and Buttermilk from Aspen? How can we get those people off the road more effectively? And what can the ski co do to affect that? So that's just something that makes me crazy in the winter is.
And I will say, Dan Blankenship is here on the line, so he can probably talk about ski shuttles. That
I
run
see the
seasonally
ski
as
shuttles,
well.
but I also see all the cars coming down from Snowmass at the end of the day. But if Dan wants to talk about that, that'd be awesome.
Sure.
But I have one more thing,
Yeah,
and
go
then I'm
ahead. And I
completely
do want to
done.
get a sense of like where the questions are here at the table and try to move us along because we are over time and
So
though
this
I know
is
it's important.
So this is my overall thing. I mean, this has really shown a lot of work and it's got a lot of good ideas. But none of the ideas are stop cars from going into Aspen. This is all how do we get cars faster into Aspen, and you know, forget his name, the man who spoke from the company. But anyway, he was talking about getting them more cars in a shorter amount of time. Is that really what we want? I mean, couldn't we be looking at some of the European mountain communities that don't have any cars in town? And can't we be talking about an underground parking garage underneath the Buttermilk parking? Can we look at Vail's parking garage? I mean, when you go to Vail and you go into the parking garage, you walk down the stairs and you are in the midst of this beautiful area, which is, and I know Vail is designed for tourists and Aspen is a place where people live, so it's kind of different that way, but I'm just surprised that the elephant in the room is not talked about at all. That to me is the elephant in the room. So I'm done. Thank you.
Did you want to respond to Francie?
I would emphasize that this, again, is a near term. So this is what can we do in the near term. And it's a significant undertaking to do even just a cordon toll. What you're talking about in terms of closing a state highway would be, I'm not even too sure what the process would be for that, to be honest. So that I think is part of the discussion to be had at next year's retreat. And this again is to give staff direction on what can we work on while we're having those conversations. And then in terms of Paul's comment, in terms of moving vehicles, keep in mind he's talking about cars going out of town, not coming
Oh,
into
great,
town.
okay. But they went into town. Thank you, David.
All right, are there other questions here? And we'll bring them back. Oh, hi, John. Yes,
Hey,
go ahead. Hi.
Yeah, I had a quick question. The channelization of the roundabout, I've heard both pro and con about trying it. I think we should try it because what do we have to lose? And especially since Paul says it reduces dwell time, it makes traffic move faster out. That's one of our goals. But my question is, you've said it's a temporary fix. Is there any way we could try it before the roundabout gets changed into concrete? Because certain people have said, what's the point of drilling into concrete after it's done when it's just been built? Can we try it in the asphalt ahead of time?
I don't think that we have time.
Okay.
Mostly because it has to be done in the summertime before snow flies, and this still requires CDOT permitting, and CDOT permitting is going to take likely
years.
Definitely
In that scale.
before snow starts,
Digital
or
tape
after
it in.
snow starts flying, we would be through that process.
So Dave, if you don't mind, I can just mention that, CDOT likes the idea and in fact proposed to us a certain type of channelization that doesn't require being, drilled into the pavement. And there is precedent. We also found another roundabout somewhere, I think down in the Telluride region, that actually has some channelization in it. So this isn't, terribly far-fetched, and it can happen relatively quick.
Okay, other questions? Yes, Bill.
Couple questions. So the channelization, how far back would it start for the roundabout?
That's still to be decided. So that would be part of the design process. It would need to be back far enough that the vehicles feel safe and understand they're in a channelized lane, and so that you don't have vehicles crossing over right before the roundabout. But that would need to be, we would need to talk that through with the engineers to figure out where that should actually start.
Okay. And the signals at Harmony Lane and Owl Creek, are those signals currently coordinated? And if not, why not?
I believe they're coordinated. I can't say for sure.
Harmony Lane isn't coordinated with anything. It has a mind of its own.
It seems that way.
Not in harmony.
Hardly lets cars through.
It's so
Yes.
bad, it's so bad.
Yeah, so I think that
They are more so during the busy hours, but at certain times of the day they may run.
Okay, I just think that's something that we should look at. The other thing you had on there was BRT to Snowmass, and you said that's in the 2040 budget. Does that also include the no fare service from Aspen to Snowmass?
No. So the Destination 2040 is covering the cost of the BRT connecting service that the EOT used to pay for. So they picked that up. That service, EOTC started it, RAFTA now pays for it, and it's being carried forward. The no fare service, are you talking about the transfer of that service?
Mm-hmm.
Those discussions are still ongoing between staff and RAFTA. For those of you who are on the RAFTA board, I believe you'll be seeing something about it here in the next couple months coming before you as part of that board. But that discussion is in RAFTA's court right now.
Great. Yeah, I'd really like to see that moved over to RAFTA so that this board can utilize our funds for infrastructure, which is primarily what we should be looking at. Thank you.
Okay. All right, let's keep moving here because we have to come back and have our 3 jurisdictions vote, and I think we may be shuffling some of the staff recommendation is what I'm sensing.
So Kelly, do you need a
Graham?
motion put out on the table?
Well, we haven't had a public hearing yet, so.
We never used to do the public
yes,
hearings. really.
because, well, we
Kelly,
didn't always vote on things.
Kelly, don't forget Dan.
I know, Steve, I see him, thank you. So I'm going to ask our patient folks at the Aspen Institute Mobility Study Task Force to come join us and make some room for them. And in the meantime, while they're getting settled, I'm going to ask Dan Blankenship. I'm sure you have answers to some questions that have come up, Dan, and thanks for your patience.
I need to leave at 6:30.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and nice to see everybody. And you're a very
What do you need?
creative group in terms of trying to find cost-effective solutions to getting people across Highway 82, and I applaud you for that. I want to say that underpass was on the drawing board prior to discussions about having channelization for BRTs and so forth. So it really was something that we were trying to advance previously because there have been a couple of accidents there. One quite serious involving Irma Ruchinko. I don't know if you folks know her, but she used to live in those Maroon group apartments. And she was legally in the crosswalk and a vehicle hit her. And she was injured pretty severely. And as Patty said, who's been out there, has tried to get across there, you know, you have turning movements from Owl Creek and people are looking down valley to see if anything's coming and they're not watching people step off curbs and so forth. I would say that if you count the number of people that are utilizing the service or trying to cross there, and you look back, you know, prior to the pandemic, we have numbers and we can show you how many people are holding their light there on a daily basis. But, you know, looking at the past is one thing, but if we want more people to use transit and to travel to and from Buttermilk, and even people who live in Burlington to use transit, we really need to try to make it safe for them to get across. If I'm a parent and I've got younger kids, I may not feel comfortable having them cross the highway there. And there are major events like the X Games where there are thousands and thousands of people crossing there, some of whom are inebriated or otherwise
Let's be honest,
impaired.
most.
Someone just floating
And,
across the road.
and then there are other events like, you know, concerts that ski companies might want to do in sometime in the future. So I ask you not to look so much at the past, but look at the future, look into the future and try to visualize infrastructure that would make it safer for people to travel by transit, bicycle, walk, cross highways, and so forth. And I would also encourage you to understand, I believe, that most likely this underpass is not going to happen using local funds, or at least the majority of it's not going to be funded by local funding. If we can get some plans developed, we can apply for grants. And with the current administration, there is a lot of infrastructure funding that's coming down the pike. I just don't think we want anybody to get hurt there. And while I admit that, you know, going up valley might be just helping people get to the roundabout to wait longer, the same isn't true in the down valley direction. We actually want those people to clear out of town faster. And if we don't have pedestrians in the signal phase, those people could process out of town more rapidly. So, you know, I don't know if I've answered your questions or what have you, but I just really would say don't discount this underpass entirely. Let's do some more due diligence, try to get information that lets you know how many people are using it now, and then try to think down the road. If we really want more people to use transit and use alternative modes of transportation, we're going to need to make it safe for them to get across the highway. People are traveling at highway speeds there. Some are going 50 plus miles an hour through that intersection. They're breaking the law, but that doesn't mean that they don't do it. And we have tried to address as many of these crossings as we could in the places where people cross the most and where the greatest potential for there to be an accident is. And it not only helps the traffic, but it sure makes traveling by bus and by bike and walking a lot safer for people in the community. I thank you for your time. I'm happy to try to answer any other questions you might have.
I see Greg Poshman's hand went up. Greg, you have a quick question?
Yeah, just for Dan, just the relative cost of a bus stop relocation versus an underpass. I'm still stuck on my, looking at the Google Earth map. I see that basically both the current crosswalk at Owl Creek and the underpass, which I'm blanking the name of the road now, are almost equidistant from the chairlifts at Buttermilk. And that's, I'll refer back to my comments, but it's about 870 feet from the crosswalk to the chairlifts, and it's about 880 feet from the underpass that's existing to the chairlifts. And yes, it would require some relocation of things, but I guess my next question really for you was just, can you give us a ballpark estimate? What does it take to put in a bus stop? What's the actual cost versus, or maybe just alongside the cost of an underpass?
Well, I would be just guessing at this point, but it could be somewhere between $2 and $3 million.
Is he talking to us?
Dave, we can't,
can't hear you.
sorry, Dan, we can't hear you so well.
Okay, well, I would be guessing, but I would think that it would be somewhere between $2 and $3 million if the right of way exists.
$2 and $300.
Million.
It
$2
might
and
be
$3
on
million.
airport land. But then you're letting people off in the Up Valley direction who are then going to need to cross Owl Creek at grade.
Okay.
I'm actually speaking about the Up Valley underpass that's closer to Tyhack.
That's the
one
private Maroon Creek Road.
that's closer to Tyhack.
That's Stage Road, that's the Maroon Creek
boy.
underpass.
Stage Road, thank you. That's the one that's equidistant to the chairlifts and the actual base lifts as the crosswalk at Owl Creek.
Yeah, if you can cut through the end of Aspen.
Pretty interesting.
I don't have the map. I can't, and I think you're talking about the underpasses at Stage Road, right? So
Yeah.
people that are coming from Burlingame or from the Moon Creek housing backtrack to go under, then they've got to go across Owl Creek to get to, at grade, to get to the lifts. And I think, no?
No, they
Is there
don't.
another underpass?
So
Maybe-
I'm
yeah,
gonna,
we'd
I'm
have
gonna
to
try
dig a
and
map
keep
out.
us
Maybe this is a
focused
future
here. Yeah, I
conversation.
think if there's
Just wanna
not
make sure it's in there.
support for the underpass, then we've given fodder to Dave to explore. And that will, I think, come out as we are able to take our votes. Sorry, I am moving us along. I'm assuming we're gonna make up time on the Maroon Creek funding question rather than a half hour. I'm looking to you all to support me in that assumption. All right. So I'm going to turn it over here to Crystal Logan. Hi,
Hi there.
welcome. Thanks for joining us and hanging in there.
Of course, thank you. I'm Crystal Logan with the Aspen Institute, and I wanted to call attention to the memo that we sent each of you earlier this week along with your packet. We're thrilled to see the great work that Fair and Peers has done, and we just wanted to add these notes and recommendations to clarify the findings, because I know there's a lot of data to go through there. And from our standpoint, we just really wanted to put a finer point on the success of some of these recommendations. One of our members of our task force, Maria, will say more, and we've got other task force members on Zoom who are not planning to speak, I don't think, John Bennett and Michael Kinsley. But I just want to remind you all that the task force on transportation and mobility was formed by the Aspen Institute and with support from the town of Snowmass Village, Pitkin County, and the city of Aspen. Our mission really was to create a 2035 vision for innovative transportation and mobility options for the Upper Valley, knowing how intractable this issue has been over the last 40 plus years. So our 31 citizens that were part of this group started in 2016. They met for 15 months, and then they reached their final recommendations, which we recommended to the EOTC in 2017. our members are really here to continue supporting your work. And just as a reminder, the members, these 31 people, come from various sectors. Geographically, the members live in communities and neighborhoods from Aspen to Newcastle. Our group included the mayors of Snowmass, Aspen, the current mayor of Basalt, the chair of the Pitkin County Commissioners, the head of RAFTA, the local head of Parsons Engineering, a senior member of the press, a senior leader at SkiCo, and many other business and nonprofit leaders. Along the way, we brought in 5 international, or really national transportation experts to meet with us about our local issues, and then we presented those to the public, or we hosted those experts in public hearings. And our main goals were to create better mobility for citizens, reduce traffic congestion on our highway, and then reduce the carbon footprint. And I feel compelled just to say quickly, based on comments that have been made about 4 lanes and entrance and all of that, I just want to say that we reviewed all of these mobility options, including a 4-lane, but we put them through a rigorous screening process to match up to our community values. To survive the screening, a potential solution had to be effective at moving people or reducing travel demand, be financially viable, reduce carbon emissions, be convenient and comfortable, and build social equity. And then, of course, reflect community values. So the IMS, as Dave said, includes ride-sharing, congestion reduction measures, HOV lane enforcement, ride-hailing, and RAFTA enhancements, and all of those things have to work together as carrots and sticks. So we're not talking about all carrots or all sticks. They definitely have to work together. And what we've heard about HOV enforcement is the sheriff's office doesn't want to enforce it unless people have an option. So it all really we have to offer them ways to not drive their cars or to ride share with their fellow commuters. So I know I'm going on a little bit too long, but this integrative system really shifts away from the most expensive options like 4-lane, light rail, other really cost-prohibitive options, and looks at more technologically feasible and innovative ways, like Skippy said, to look into the future of how we can offer more options for the future. So with that, we're thrilled that Dave is working on this, and you're doing a great job, so thank you.
And thank you for
Crystal,
your
can I
advance
ask
memo.
a quick question?
Sure.
When you say you screened did you then screen out the record of decision as not being a sufficient support for bus rapid transit? I mean, I'm not in favor of unrestricted 4-lane. I mean, let me make that clear.
I think what we did was, and John Bennett would be better to speak to this, but basically we took the options on the table and we ranked them. Is it affordable? Will it reduce traffic?
Yeah, no, I heard that.
So
okay.
I don't know how
Was it addressed at all? Okay,
I can't speak to that.
thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone for all of your hard work and careful thought, and to your staff. Do you mind, Dave, if you would put up the IMS system up on the slide so we could look at it while we're talking about it? My name's Maria Morrow, and I was a member of the Community Forum, and this system for transit improvement was arrived at after a lot of thought, as you heard. One of the challenges that you face as our leaders is when you're enacting policy and deciding what to implement, you come from looking at the forest to then studying the trees and thinking about anecdotes. And I think it's helpful in a decision-making process to back up then and look at the forest as you choose the trees that you're going to focus on, because you can lose sight of it. You know, you start zeroing in on something, but when you're implementing policy, I think it's a helpful approach. And so I wanted to bring this slide back up, and I wanted to talk about some overriding principles that we learned when we heard from experts in other places that drove us to implement this system. Because if you understand some of these fundamentals, you'll see why each cog is so important. one of the first things, and this is no disservice to our wonderful RAFTA system, but you cannot build your way out of the traffic problem. Infrastructure is not the only solution. It is something you can do and you can implement, and it can make changes, and sometimes it delays the inevitable, but you cannot build your way out of it. You just can't. This is what we learned from the experts, and it's a good lesson to keep at the forefront of your mind. Infrastructure is expensive, it's responsive, it's slow, and it doesn't achieve grand results very quickly. The other principle was if you build it, they will come, right? That the larger the infrastructure you build, and this is a slight variation of the first lesson, the more you build, the more people will get in cars because it will be easier and quicker for them to do it. It's the principle of an induced traffic. And every solution, you have to think about the induced traffic that you've just allowed. And I've heard you all talk about it already here about, are we delaying the inevitable, or are we just making it so more people can get there? So if you build it, they will come. The other thing that resonated the most, and I remember the most, was that there's a new generation of people coming in who are more willing to be less dependent on cars, even if they live 20 to 30 miles away from where they work, which 70% of our workforce does. I remember it very clearly because the slide was someone over 50, and then they showed a young millennial, and they talked about the dependence on cars. And those of us over 50 love our cars. It's part of our culture, and there's a new generation coming that is more willing to explore new technologies, to not live with a car at all, and to live further away from work and find creative solutions. And that we need to capitalize on that, accept that that's a change and that's a generational shift. So that was something we learned and we saw very much, and I remember it because it was painful for me personally. The other lesson that was very much imposed upon us was the notion that our rapid transit system does not lend easily, as fantastic as it is and award-winning as it is, it doesn't lend into the first and last mile solutions, right? That we have this problem with a lot of our workforce down valley where we have a trunk line system, right? So they're going to get people up and down the valley. But people, when they get to the lower valley, live further away from the stop. So you need to be looking at solutions that don't depend on RAFTA, that get people to the trunk line. So that was a very, very important message as you're thinking about how we came up with the items on this pillar. The last one was harness the resources that you have. Right, we want to think till 2030, but we have these resources. These are the lanes we have. We need to manage them better, right? These are the buses that we have. We need to manage them better. We need to give people options. We need to work with the resources we have and focus on them, and that is a lot of the low-hanging fruit. And we need to harness resources that are out there that don't depend upon RAFTA and our own current system, like apps, like people's willingness to go to a different company that's going to help us move people around. Let's harness all the resources that are out there and use the resources we have much more effectively. The other thing that drove us as a group very strongly, and I'm so happy that you started your session with the mission statement, was community values. And in your mission statement, there are these concepts there that lead about happiness and community and equity. And so much of these other options that are not infrastructure related and elsewhere speak to that. Ultimately, the big numeric items, the big changes would be things like a cordon toll, right? Or pricing, right? Or parking, right? And I agree, like how much more can we ask Mitch to go out to the public and persuade everyone that there are community benefits for the pricing increases? He has done a very noble job and he survived it and he's still alive in Aspen. But these are very, very unpopular, but very effective ideas, right? And so there is the stick, which is these are very effective pricing structures, management, cordon tolls, and ultimately, if we want to make a big dent in the environment and in vehicles miles traveled, we'd probably have to get there. But these other solutions help with the equity piece, because equity is ultimately about power and money and choices, right? And nowhere, I mean, in our valley, you have to understand that these pricing structures are going to be extraordinarily unpopular, right? It is going to sound like a gate to Aspen. It's going to sound like closing the doors. You're going to be asking the worker bees who can't afford to live here to pay more money and telling them not to come. Some of them won't come, which will hurt our businesses. And so all of these consequences, and I don't like to use the phrase unintended consequences because I think that that downplays it. These are real, very real consequences of the way our valley is laid out. And in the Fair and Pierce report, they talk about it. You are ultimately going to try to sell people on pricing structures and management structures that disadvantage our workers and close Aspen. And in order to do that, you have to make sure that you're providing them with options that are equitable, that give them choices, that give them ways to get around the pricing or the you're not welcome here. And so I would really urge you to make sure as you choose these things you're going to do, and I understand the cost and everything else goes in, there's a phase 1, there's a phase 2, but remember that if we don't address equity and provide people with choices and ways to do things cheaper and to get around what you ultimately need to do to reduce the emissions and the vehicle miles traveled, then you will just find yourself in a big PR problem. Much bigger than the one that Mitch has had when he tried to do parking. It'll be much greater than that. So I just want to urge you to make sure you look at each of them because they are integrated, especially things like ride sharing, ride hailing, and then the HOV lanes, right? Those go together and they work together and have a tremendous equitable value when executed together. And so I would urge you to think about it really systemically when you deploy it and to remember that infrastructure will not solve all these problems. And then this is not the opinion of the committee, but I had an idea, and it went on Councilwoman Richards' idea about like the HOV lane management. I think we should maybe take a page out of the Twin Lakes Sheriff's Department and we could put just like a vehicle there with a mannequin, because even though I know it's a mannequin, I always think maybe today's my day, right?
We've already thought of that. We couldn't get Joey to give his car up.
Oh, yeah. I mean, someone could donate a car and you don't even have to have a sheriff in there. If there's a human being in there every once in a while, maybe it'll work. But and that is not the view of the committee. That's my own personal view.
I like that guy. I wave at that sheriff in Twin Lakes all the time.
One of these days.
He never waves back.
Never waves back, but one day it will be a human.
Yeah, someday it will. With radar. So,
I don't think it's your fault.
John Bennett, hi. Nice to see you.
You're on mute.
You're on mute, sir.
Still on
Still
mute.
on mute.
Still
We
on
can't
mute.
hear you.
Hey.
What's that,
Okay.
John?
There we
Is that
go.
better?
There we
Yes.
Right. Thanks a lot. It's a long meeting, and I will try to be short and concise. First and most importantly, I really love the mannequin idea. I think that's terrific. I think that's a short-term implementation if I ever heard of one. So I want to say Highway 82, the entrance to Aspen, truly is the elephant in the room, as half a dozen of you commented at the beginning and later in this meeting. It includes our two biggest challenges, which are crazy traffic in both our upper and lower valley that continues to grow, and crazy escalating carbon pollution throughout our valley. The 15 months of the Community Forum Task Force work really did amount to an in-depth new look at the record of decision, which a number of you are rightly calling for. It generated fresh, innovative ideas for a mobility system that could become part of an amended record of decision, which legally, by the way, might not need to be replaced. That's not necessarily obvious that it does. All 31 of us came to consensus on the Integrated Mobility System, or IMS, and that was no small miracle, as you know, in this valley, dealing with an old and contentious an issue as the entrance to Aspen. So I think all of us, we urge you to please continue moving forward with the Integrated Mobility System, IMS. It does not require big new infrastructure spending. It isn't tens or even hundreds of millions of dollars. It's a series of smaller steps that taken together could make a huge difference. It's exciting because it addresses three big things: climate change, the quality of life for residents, and improving the visitor experience. We hope you'll continue working on both short-term and long-term issues. The near-term transit improvements that you've spent a lot of time talking about this evening, they're really important, even though they won't make a significant difference in greenhouse gas emissions or traffic jams.
long-term solutions, specifically the integrated mobility system, can actually begin solving ETA issues, ETA entrance to Aspen. I stress long-term, big picture integrated solutions because important as they are, bypass lanes, bike pedestrian underpasses, and HOV enforcement by themselves will not significantly help anyone in the West End, any commuter stuck in traffic, or visitors trying to travel up and down our valley, or our worsening greenhouse gas emissions. The transportation experts and engineers we spoke to made that abundantly clear. Really making a difference is going to require a relentless focus on big picture systemic ideas like the interrelated components of the IMS. That system includes congestion reduction measures that actually would reduce VMT, and they would also generate a good deal of funding. And the IMS also includes ride sharing, and I'll end on this thought. Ride sharing is a key element that we believe could be extremely popular in our valley. It was probably the single idea that generated the most support, enthusiasm, and excitement in our 31 members of our group. Ride sharing would be necessary to implement congestion reduction measures and would also give a very big boost to social equity in our valley. And with that, I will thank you, and like Crystal and Maria, I also want to thank you for all the good work you're doing. God bless you for doing this. It is extremely difficult and long work, and this has been going on for 5 decades now. So keep after it. I truly am beginning to think that we see a solution on the horizon that could indeed work for everyone. So thank you.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, John. All right, Michael Kinsley, nice to see you.
Hi, just a quick note. It'll be less than a minute. I was on the task force as well with John and Ward and everybody else. We really went for innovation, and one of the ways we did it was by bringing in, at the paid for by the Institute, 5 different experts. The videotapes of all 5 of those presentations are available that you can all see. If you're going to pick one, I would pick, it's about an hour long. It's a Rocky Mountain Institute presentation by Greg Rux, and Crystal can send you all the link to it. It's brilliant. It's actually entertaining. It's not going to be a burden on you to sit through it. So give that a shot. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. All right, before I close public comment, are there other folks on the line? I see we've had somebody call in. We would need you to press *9 to raise your hand or *6 to unmute yourself. Give it a few more seconds. Okay, I'm going to close public comment and bring it back to the board, and then we'll do some administrative check-in here after we resolve our one item of discussion so far this evening. Okay, so David, can you please bring up in a succinct way the proposal here for us to vote on, and then we will go ahead and take our votes by jurisdiction, and if we need to further redesign what this motion is, we'll do so then.
You won't be able to read it from here, but that's the that is the document on one
All
slide.
in favor?
It is on page 38 of your packet.
Can you explain one last thing for me as we go forward? If something's on tier 2, it is going to be looked at carefully, or are we going to only look carefully at things that have made it to tier 1 in this coming year?
So in this coming year, we will prioritize as much out of tier 1 as we can, but I wouldn't look at it as tier 1 is year 1, tier 2 is year 2.
Right.
This gives us, okay, you agree with this, we're going to then program as best as we can, as fast as we can. But it also doesn't mean that we can't move things between tier 1 and tier 2 later on, and that's part of the reason why we're not recommending this be approved as within a resolution or something that rigid. So that we can bring it back to you at another EOTC meeting and say, hey, things are shifting. What do you think about moving this up to tier 1?
Yeah, okay, that helps me. I'm happy to support this going forward. They're all good, solid projects. I wouldn't take any off. This is just speaking for me, but I really want to make sure those counters move forward. They seem to be one of the most simple things, And I don't want to be at this table in 2 years, which I probably won't be, but without any data of what has happened over the past 2 years. Thank you.
So Kelly,
Okay, yes, Patty.
I'm going to entertain a motion here for
Thank
you
you.
to give to each jurisdiction to accept staff. I'm going to do a motion to approve staff's proposed 2021 EOTC near-term transit improvement program as administrative direction. Does that, Dave, comply with what your direction is?
It does, yeah.
Okay.
I'll second.
Thank you, Rachel. And I'm going to go through, we'll start with Pitkin County, then Snowmass Village, then City of Aspen for a vote. Let me jump here on my
Or
screen.
discussion?
You want,
Yep,
you want more
so-
discussion, Rachel?
No, I don't. I just wanted to make sure anybody had something to
Sure,
say.
yep. Okay. So we'll start with Pitkin County. Further discussion? Steve?
So I am one of the few people in the room here who probably has crossed the Buttermilk Crossing actually commuting to work, because occasionally I will park at the Buttermilk parking lot and ride the raft into town, and then leaving town I need to get back to there. So I actually have crossed that highway quite a few times. And I am in favor of doing the study on the Buttermilk underpass. I think other things, it might show that there are other things that would work better, but my previous comments didn't mean I don't want to do the study on it. Also, I was the one who originally came up with the idea of the trail by Aspen Country Inn connecting clear down to the old Maroon Creek Bridge and to Truscott. One of the huge benefits of that hasn't been mentioned is that people could pull off the highway at Buttermilk and park their cars, jump on a WeCycle bike, and ride it down that side of the highway till they get to one of the crossing underpasses, either at the Stage Road or at Truscott, and get back over to the bike lane on the other side of the road. So bicycle traffic on that side needs to be taken into account too. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Other discussion from Pitkin County? Okay. Seeing none, I will do a roll call vote here. I'll start with myself. I'm going to support this. Francie?
Support it.
Thank you. Greg?
Support it.
Thank you. Patty?
Support it.
Thank you. Steve?
I support it.
Thank you. All right, we'll move on to Snowmass Village discussion, and then we'll do a roll call vote.
Okay, so just for clarification, so we're voting on tier 1. So Aspen Country Inn, design and feasibility, the Maroon Creek, design and feasibility, Harmony and Owl Creek, right? HOV lane enforcement and analysis of the Up Valley and Down Valley BRT direct to Snowmass.
Right. And did you mention the Aspen Country Inn Trail? Because that's in tier 1 as well.
Okay.
Going both ways.
Going both ways, yeah.
Pro Tem, any comments?
No, I mean, the only thing I'll say with the HOV is that I agree that enforcement's an issue, but speed is also a huge issue. People are flying down that highway like I've never seen. And if you're going to if you're going to really be able to enforce the HOV lane, it's kind of impossible, because if you're in the left lane and people are right on your butt and you cannot have any choice but to go to the other lane. And so I feel like it's not just enforcement of that, but it's also speed enforcement, because I don't know where you're supposed to go.
You're right.
Unless I don't know how to drive. But
No, you're right.
it's really bad. And I've had several people say it's even gotten worse.
Yeah.
So that's only a comment that I would, just make sure that when you're looking at HOV analysis, that you're also looking at the speed, because
We've talked to the sheriff about that.
there's
as
no
part of it.
options.
But it's a state highway, so the sheriff can't do speed
Yeah.
there, can they?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
they
yeah.
patrol all the time.
You haven't been pulled over yet?
Other
I
comments?
haven't.
Tom Good, nice to
Yet.
see you.
drive too fast.
Oh, you're on mute, sir.
Thank you, everybody. I am Mike. I've been pretty quiet over the whole thing and about the elephant in the room and everything. And I know we're talking about this near-term transit improvement program at this point. But one thing I do, I feel strongly that I don't think we should waste any more money on a mobility study for an underpass. I think more than anything, we have the elephant in the room about coming in and out of Aspen. How are we going to solve that problem? That's the biggest problem. But and I'll stop at that because I have my own comments. And being in somebody mentioned the construction industry earlier. How are we going to do this? David, you were talking about the toll roads. Potentially, how these people and the one young lady was talking about how are we going to not welcome people coming into this town? We're basically shutting the door for the contractors. How are we going to charge them if it comes down to a toll road? How are we going to charge these people? Is it going to be involved in your building permits? Then there's people doing work without building permits. So it's complicated. I know it is, and I know we have to work it out. But I'm in favor of this, but I'm not in favor of any more monies being spent on any more mobility studies.
Okay, thanks, Tom.
Thank you.
I agree with that.
Tom Fridstein, did you have any comments? I want to make sure I
Just want to clarify. I wasn't quite sure what Bill Madsen was asking. We are voting on Tier 1 and Tier 2, correct?
It's actually all three tiers, so it's the 2-page document.
All three tiers.
Yeah.
Okay.
Most of it will be coming
All
back
right.
to us to find too. So.
Yeah. Okay. I'm good.
Okay,
I have a question before they go to a motion, if I could.
go ahead, Tori.
There was a suggestion about moving something from tier 2, the vehicle counters. I didn't hear Pitkin County add that into their motion at all. If I'm incorrect, let me know. But I'm just wondering, I think this is going to come up when we talk about it.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering if other boards, if that's something that is appealing to other boards, if they would like to talk about putting that into their motion.
I did not put it in my motion. Dave, did you already move it up in part of the discussion?
I have not moved it up, so
Oh, yeah, I would move that up, so.
So let's I just want some clarification because we're adopting all of this, and Dave's work plan prioritization isn't necessarily reflected here in tier 1, 2, 3, right? So you will come back to us with your work plan and how that.
So you can
pans
move
out
it
for
forward
the
just
next
as
year.
part of our approval of this whole plan.
You can you mean shifting between tier 1 and tier 2 right now? You guys have the ability to say, yes, we want to move this up to tier 1. The one thing I would say is that, and this was something we struggled with on the staff side too, was it's very tempting to say everything's tier 1, everything's important, but then you just have a list of projects. You don't have any prioritization. So I would say that just to try to keep the scale of the projects between each of the tiers as equal as possible, just to maintain that, because I think that is important.
But I think the question was, can you move it without us? Can you move it from tier 2 to tier 1 as you see it?
Tiers, you're
Right.
gonna start investigating them. If you investigate them, you could move things up and down.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the idea is that we're going to focus our attention on tier 1, but if, there's a grant that comes out for counters and it happens to be in tier 2, we're not going
Thanks,
to say,
Crystal.
no, we're not gonna look at that.
Thank you.
Because it's tier 2. We're going to,
Okay.
we're gonna try to move forward.
So my question would it be cleaner for us to reconsider our vote and start over again?
Well, yeah, amend the motion.
I'd have to reconsider the vote because we already voted.
So we're just asking because this is information and data. So we're talking about other things going ahead. This is information and data. So that we're just asking you, is this more beneficial in tier 1 to help with everything else that we're doing? And if that's something that should be moved up, do we need to do it at this table now? And if so, then we would like to make that suggestion at least and talk to other jurisdictions and say, do you support this as well?
In my opinion, the data collection should be done immediately because we're losing data as every day goes by. So in my opinion, that is I'm happy to hear that you say that is very important to you because it's very important to me, but it's also not sexy and all that stuff. So I think that if you all feel that way, I would encourage you to move it up to tier 1 now.
Okay. So let's check in with
I would agree.
Pitkin County, who is the only jurisdiction that's voted at this point about Dave's amended staff recommendation. So Greg, I see your hand. Go ahead.
Can I just make a new motion that we accept this with the amended set of,
No.
and vote on it?
No, we have to vote to reconsider our vote. So I will do a motion to reconsider.
That's the motion I'd like to make. Oh, then I'll second it.
Okay.
We have to reconsider now, and we can vote again.
So we all vote now, yes, we're gonna reconsider, then we vote again on
So
the
we're gonna
amended.
vote to reconsider. Aye.
Okay. And I absolutely support the data collection. This came up in our conversation and with Brian Pettit
So
yesterday.
let's call that vote to
Okay.
reconsider.
So, Pitkin County Commissioners, we are voting to reconsider the motion that we approved. All in favor, please say aye.
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 So I see Steve's thumbs up, so I'm gonna note we have all 5 of us on this. I'm being a little
So
sloppy
now
here.
I will make a motion to accept staff's direction for the proposed 2021 EOTC near-term transit improvement program as administrative direction, moving the, what is it called? The data collection
Counters.
counters?
Yeah, automated vehicle counters.
Yeah, into tier 1 as part of the direction we're giving to staff.
I'll second it.
Second.
Third.
So, okay, so let's
Skippy
do this
has a
quickly.
question.
Okay.
There's a
Did
question
you
for
have,
you.
yes.
I just had a quick clarification, because 2 suggestions were made that are important to this, and I just want to make sure you don't have to do it twice. One was that the data collection includes Power Plant Road, which I think is critical, and the other was from Greg, that we're talking about, like, who's coming? Is this construction or is this resident, which is also really important. So I just wanted to make sure that if we're moving this up, we're looking
Yeah.
at those things.
So in terms of vehicle counters, we're not going to know
It won't tell you.
who it is. We'll be able to differentiate between type of vehicle, like we'll know whether
Yeah.
it's a bike or a car or a truck,
Right.
but we're not going to know who they are.
Yeah, there's just a big difference in terms of people going to work versus people bringing their work with, in terms of how you mitigate that. And you can
Right,
tell that
but-
pretty easily.
But some of the other earlier studies they were talking about earlier
I know.
said they'd got some mix of
I know.
traffic.
I'm just making sure as we're moving up data, we're looking at that, because there's a huge difference.
But that isn't
trends.
in the plan
Yeah.
anyway.
Okay,
So
I
we're
just wanna
not
make sure.
including something
Because
that's
to do
not
that, you have
already
to have
in
somebody
the
stopping cars and
document.
asking people where they're going and what they're
Although
doing.
knowing if it's a
Yeah,
truck.
I'm not suggesting that.
They're pretty big. So.
All right,
Be
Pitkin
done.
County, we're gonna do a voice vote
They're already
on the
stopped anyway.
amended, near-term improvement program to include the automated counters in tier 1. I'm first, and I'll say aye. Francie?
Aye.
Greg?
Aye.
Thank you. Patty?
Aye.
Steve?
Aye.
Okay. So
Tori,
now
thanks
on the
for
floor
bringing-
for the remaining jurisdictions is this amended program, and is there further discussion from Snowmass Village? Okay, seeing none, I'll call a voice vote. Mayor Madsen?
Yes.
Tom Fridstein?
Yes.
Thank you. Tom Good?
Yes.
Thank you. Alyssa?
Yes.
And I'll call Bob Circus. I think he has dropped off the meeting. Can't blame him.
So I have to do
All right,
shortly
City
to
of
get out of here.
Aspen, we're turning it over to you. I'm sorry.
address a procedural item with the council.
Okay, you want to come to the dais, please?
Yeah, careful.
Careful.
Members of council, one of you need to make a motion and a second on this adoption. It needs to be within the 5 of you, along with a roll call vote within the 5 of you. You are in a special meeting right now.
Oh, so did I
Thank you.
mess that up with Snowmass Village, probably?
I don't know their requirements, I'm sorry.
Okay, all right, we're learning tonight.
Boy, will you guys
Yeah.
adopt my motion
I
and
would
your
make a
motion? and-
motion to adopt the motion, amended motion of the EOTC for the city council.
Second the motion.
Okay,
Thanks, Sarah.
I think we have to do that
And then we
too.
have to do
okay.
a roll call.
We'll
I
go
don't really
back.
know, but
It's all
it
good.
sounds
This is our
like
first
something we
time,
would
we'll
do.
figure it out.
You have
So,
to consider your
Any
vote.
any
fur-
further
try it.
discussion?
We're
from
never
the
gonna,
City of
I have
Aspen?
difference.
Difference
My
between
mouth
what
is
you
gone.
did.
Further discussion, Ward?
Doesn't matter.
Yeah,
I'm gonna start over
I
now.
did serve on the forum for 15 months. I'm totally convinced of induced demand. I think all of our solutions should be aimed at bringing fewer cars into Aspen to make it a better experience for Aspen. I do support the work plan, and I think data collection absolutely is, without it, you're just shooting in the dark. But my goal is fewer cars in Aspen and get the people in faster with less carbon. And for me, the entrance to Aspen is the Brush Creek Park and Ride. Thank you. And if we're taking a vote, you'll do a roll call vote.
I will. Any further discussion, councilors? Okay. We have a motion and a second. I will call for a voice vote. Mayor Tory.
Yes.
Thank you. Ward.
Yes.
Thank you. Skippy.
Yes.
Thank you. Rachel.
Yes.
Thank you. John.
Yes.
Thank you. And since we did not have a proper motion, I will look for a motion and a second from Snowmass Village.
They need to reconsider their vote already?
Well, I'm not sure it's a
No.
proper
Make a new one.
vote, so.
Yeah, it was.
New one of the same
That was a
thing.
practice vote.
Yeah.
It was practice vote, it wasn't real.
Mulligan.
Okay, so
Mulligan
That's
bad.
a new one.
I'll
You know
make
what
the
intent is here.
motion
Thank you, Alyssa.
to accept what Rachel said before.
The
The
EOTC.
EOTC
Amended
motion as
near
amended.
term improvement.
As
program.
amended.
I'll second that. I'll second that.
Tom, good. Okay, thank you. We'll do a voice vote again. Mayor Madsen.
Yes.
Thank you. Tom Fridstein.
Yes.
Tom Good.
Yes.
And Alyssa.
Yes, why
Thank
don't I
you.
get my last name said? Everyone else gets it.
The guy.
Oh, Alyssa Shank. Sorry. I'm very
Joking,
sorry.
I'm joking.
I noticed that too. All the guys. got
Okay,
their-
so folks, we have a matter that we've not addressed on our agenda, remaining,
minutes.
as well as updates and information only, which is in our memo. So I do want to check in. Our IGA allows us to independently review these, right, David? But if there is, what's the word I'm looking for? Perseverance at the table, we can persevere through this next item. But I want to check in with you all, because we are at time.
Well, what?
That's what I'm asking.
Oh,
If
that-
we-
that- oh, I
if we
thought
wanna
you said the
continue our
updates.
meeting to do the funding, or have David visit our individual
I
jurisdictions
have
on
a
this item.
7:15. I'm happy to stay till 7:10.
Okay.
And the timeline on the funding is?
That helps.
As soon as possible.
So it's just a matter of,
it.
can I ask a question before you even start? May I, Kelly?
Sure.
Do we have the money in EOTC to fund this, or do we not?
Yes.
Then let's just fund it. We need to get it done. That roundabout needs to be done. I mean, we cannot continue to pothole fix that roundabout every 6 weeks, so.
Can we address this issue in 15 minutes?
Depending on, I can run through, I can do a very abbreviated
I just
3-minute
did it for
presentation.
you.
Is there going to remain quorums here of 3 of each entity for the next 15 minutes? I'm looking for some nods and
I'll
such.
be here.
Okay.
I
All
will-
right, we'll forge ahead. We've learned a lot. We'll better plan for the future. And
All
good luck
right.
to the next chair. Okay, David, go ahead. Get us through
All
this
right,
Maroon Creek
I will
Roundabout funding request.
Do an extra abbreviated version here. So CDOT is requesting $271,000 from the EOTC in 2022 for the Maroon Creek Roundabout reconstruction. Staff did analyze this for a nexus, and we determined that there is an appropriate nexus between transit and the funding request that's been made. This is a list of overall funding so far. The EOTC contribution is necessary in order to make the project whole. The updated construction estimate is $2.6 million. I do want to point out that there was an error in your packet for the CDOT contribution that was identified at $1.19 million. I inadvertently put in some design costs that are not part of construction, so the actual construction contribution is $949,000. I also want to point out that the EOTC contribution would only go toward reconstructing the roundabout itself. It would not go toward the larger project of repaving from Aspen up to the roundabout. CDOT is covering that cost separately. And then there's 2 main, I'm not going to go through everything that's changing here, but essentially it's some geometric changes that should reduce conflict points and increase efficiency, and replacing the asphalt with concrete. This will increase the efficiency and reliability for transit that moves through this mixed traffic critical infrastructure node. And then finally, in terms of approvals, the City of Aspen and the Town of Snowmass Village, you have draft resolutions within your packet. because of the new IGA, you will see those from now on. The county is on a slightly different schedule because the county administers the budget, so it'll go through the third quarter supplemental that will take the place of the city and town resolutions, should this be approved. You do have a revised EOTC budget in your packet. I do want to note that something I noticed way too late in the game was that I put it in the ongoing category instead of the projects category. So if you do approve this, I recommend making the amendment that it be moved down to projects and not remain an ongoing. It has been scored according to the strategic plan CVTP. We are recommending approval based on that score and the available funding. And with that, staff is recommending approval of the roundabout, of funding it at $271,000. So there's 3 different items here: approval of the funding request, amendment of the budget, and again, I recommend moving this from ongoing down into projects, and then authorization of signature on the resolutions of approval for the City of Aspen and Town of Snowmass Village.
Were you separate those? Or is that just one?
That's just one, right?
What's that?
That's just one vote, but we.
Or do we have to do 3?
I think you can do it as one vote.
We haven't done anything with 1 vote.
I'm getting us better though. Okay, so I will look for discussion from everyone, and then we'll go to individual jurisdictions. Francie, did you
I was
have a
going to
hand?
make a motion.
Let's check in real quick.
Supportive.
Any clarifications needed? Okay, so I will go to Pitkin County to make a motion on the Maroon Creek Roundabout Reconstruction CDOT funding request and our contribution as amended to move this project from ongoing into the project list.
All right, I have a
Pitkin
question.
County.
So
But then it comes back to Pitkin County to approve again as part of our third quarter supplementals. So we're voting on it here and then voting on it again?
You will see this again. You will also see it again as a part of an IGA process with CDOT.
So if for some reason the vote was to change, we could, because I hate to say, well, we've already approved it, even though we still haven't voted on it yet officially with the county and supplemental approvals.
If the county, as a part of the supplementals, for some reason it didn't go through, we would have to reconsider the situation at that time.
Just want to make sure that we're not putting our vote out ahead of our public process.
No,
and
that's
this
still
is-
would need to go through the
This is a
process.
public hearing. So, I will open the public hearing right now on this item. If there's any members of the public who wish to speak on this, please go ahead and raise your hand or press star 9.
We have to vote on it again. We're learning as we go.
Okay, I'm not seeing any members of the public wishing to comment on the funding request, so I will close the public hearing, and I will bring it back to jurisdictions. Francie moved the funding request with the amendment to move the project to the project list, and I need a second from Pitkin County.
I'll second.
Francie will second. Further
Second.
discussion? Steve, I see your hand. Go ahead.
In light of the discussion about the channelization of the bus lanes through the roundabout that we had earlier today, which on first glance at that seems to me to be a good idea, I would hate to spend over $2 million on this project right now and then come back in a year or two and have to redo some of what we just spent all this money on. So I ask, is there any way that this scope of this project could either be delayed to do a quick study on the channelization just through the roundabout, and maybe expand the project, add some more money to it, and do the whole thing at one time, and save having to redo something, tear up brand new construction to do something new in a couple of years.
Thank you, Steve. Can I call? Did you want to respond, or should I defer to Andrew?
I'm happy to respond initially. So in terms of the channelization, that would I would not recommend combining them. I would recommend moving this project forward. It has a lot of momentum. It's been designed. And the channelization at this point is not anticipated to change any of the geometric features of this reconstruction. So the reconstructed design was considered within the initial vetting of the channelization by Mead and Hunt.
So what you're saying is the channelization will not interfere with the work we're gonna do with the reconstruction and vice versa.
Correct.
Thank
And
you.
I will call on Andrew Knapp. He is our project lead at CDOT on the Roundabout reconstruction. Andrew, nice to see you.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I just would echo what David was saying, is that currently we don't anticipate any throwaway work with what we're planning to potentially implement the channelization idea. Since that channelization has major challenges in winter snow removal, it would need to be removable. So we're not anticipating constructing a permanent concrete channelization at this time. So what we're potentially considering moving forward would be something removable that is compatible with what we're planning on constructing.
Great answer.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for hanging in there. Any other questions or discussion from BOCC? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to call, we have Francie moved, Patty second. I'm going to call a voice vote. I'm the chair. I support this. Aye. Francie?
Aye.
Greg?
Aye.
Thank you. Patty?
Aye.
Thank you. Steve?
Aye.
Okay, great. Moving on to Snowmass Village, I will ask you guys for a motion and a second on this project with the amendment to move it from an ongoing work plan item to a projects list.
I'll make the motion
Thank you,
to move forward approve the roundabout reconstruction request and moving it from projects, ongoing projects to ongoing to projects.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Is there further discussion from Town of Snowmass Village folks? Okay, I'm seeing none. Let me see, I don't know if we lost Tom Good. I think we did. Okay, so I'll go through a voice vote. Mayor Mattson?
Yes.
Thank you. Tom Fritzstein?
Yes.
Thank you. Tom Good? I think he's dropped off. Alyssa?
Yes.
And
She still didn't give you a last name.
Alyssa Shank.
I'm becoming
Bob
like
Sir has also dropped off. We still
said
have
I'm
a
becoming
quorum.
like you.
Thank you,
Just calls
Snowmass
me
Village.
Alyssa.
All right, City of
waiting.
Aspen. I'll look to you folks.
Take a motion.
You can make a motion.
I'll make a motion that we approve the 2022 Maroon Creek Roundabout reconstruction funding request of $271,000. That we also approve the amended EOTC budget dated today. Yes, we will be authorizing, and that this is moved from ongoing to projects.
Good motion.
We have a second.
John seconded. Okay, thank you.
Good job.
Any further discussion? No. All right, seeing none. Tori?
Yes.
Ward?
Yes.
Thank you.
Wake up, Ward.
He's in Maine,
See,
that's time
yes,
difference.
Rachel?
Was that where you?
Yeah, John
I'm still
Doyle?
here. I'm still awake.
Get the wrong hat on.
Yes, please.
Thank you. Okay, thank you all. We've learned a lot. We're done with our business today. I am happy to stick around if David or others wanted to give the updates for the benefit of the public, but I'm not sure the other
I have a
committee
question
members
as far as
have to.
business. Do we no
Yes.
longer approve the minutes or decisions from the last meeting? Generally, in the past, we've always done that, haven't we?
We have not as part of the EOTC. You will start, so this meeting, you'll see the minutes at the next meeting. So we'll start doing it, starting at this
Because
one.
I read the minutes from the last meeting and made a correction,
I saw your correction.
and you were impressed. I was on vacation and made a correction.
I did make that correction.
Thank you.
Okay. So David, what is your prerogative? Would you like to stay and do updates? And I'm happy to stay and.
If anyone has any questions about updates, I think we can adjourn and I can answer those questions separately if you'd like. I wasn't planning on doing any presenting on the update items.
I got it.
Just answering questions.
I have one other last thing. If anybody would like to take food, it's my responsibility. I've been delegated to put it away in the refrigerator.
Okay.
Bye,
thank you.
Skippy. Grab something on your way out.
All right, so I will look for a motion
Motion
to
to adjourn.
Thank
Second.
you. Thank you, Tori. Thank you, Patty. Do we have to do a roll call vote on that too?
Should we meet?
No, okay.
No.
All right, thank you, everyone.
Aye.
Good work tonight.
Get up there.
Appreciate you all.
What were you gonna do in the rain?
It's been a while.
Teach them.
Oh, I'm like, why is he?
just drove over Sunday.
Bye.
Thank you. Thanks for.